Ago no, ago eshu ago lo no, ago lo no.
Bandele Books presents The Gatekeeper Staff, Book 1 of the T.J. Young in the Orishas series, written by Antoine Bandele. Read for you by Nakia Renee. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fantasy fiction and not an accurate depiction of the living practice of Ifa and its many branches and followers in the motherland and the diaspora. Dedication. To my Yoruba family name, I will follow you home. Chapter 1. Not first, not last.
Heads up, Lucky Charm!
A basketball came hurling at TJ Young's head. Too slow to get his hands up, the ball smacked against his cheek and out of bounds. Lamar, one of his opponents, howled like a damned hyena, and considering his sharp jaw was contoured like a snout, that was a fair comparison. TJ avoided Lamar's squinting eyes as the boy's laughter grew stronger with each passing moment, his teammates following suit with their own guffaws. One of them stomped their foot against the schoolyard asphalt for added effect.
This dude really tried to catch it with his face, though?
He bawled. Some lucky charm he is, the stout Christian whispered to Jordan, the tallest girl in 8th grade. TJ was sure they were regretting choosing him over Andy Wilkins. Andy was probably the worst 14-year-old dribbler in Los Angeles, but he could at least catch the ball. He must have looked much better than the flimsy lucky charm superstition bestowed upon TJ. His nickname was sort of the worst. The label never helped him charm the ladies or talk his way out of homework. It only helped him not get chosen last at pickup basketball during lunch. But in recent weeks, it seemed like whichever team picked him won, despite his novice skill. So, the nickname stuck. In short, his position on the team was more mascot than star player. Don't just stand there, Jordan snapped as her freckles scrunched up in a scowl. Go get the ball, bro! She thumbed to the basketball, which then lay against the chain-link fence surrounding the school blacktop. TJ gave her a nod and jogged off, embarrassed. He hadn't expected the ball to come to him in the fast break. Most of the time, Jordan and Christian passed the ball between the two of them while the rest of the team watched them in astonishment. The best any of them could hope to do was cheer them on with a slap on the back or an obligatory chant of, "Let's go!" A group of pretty girls leaning back on the fence quieted their giggling as TJ approached. A red heat rose to his cheeks. He just hoped he didn't look like a clown. That's all he needed. Avoiding their judging side eyes, he knelt to grab the ball, shielding his eyes with one hand from the hot, glistening blacktop. When his fingers met the orange, pimpled rubber, a subtle sensation ran up his arm. It buzzed like a tiny static shock, as though touching a metal surface after rubbing your fingers together. It often happened when he played basketball. The tingle meant that good things were to come. His mother would have called it his ashe at work, the force to make things happen and produce change. TJ just called it all a bunch of hocus pocus. He could never do anything with his own ashe, if he had any at all. But his family were powerful diviners with the ability to produce magic on a whim. Commune with your pet goldfish? Yep. Predicting the weather with cowries? Easy. Manifest fire out of nowhere? Without breaking a sweat? Well, maybe a little sweat. It all came easy to TJ's family, but in 14 years, the only magic he could manifest was a belch after a good meal of chicken and jollof rice. Despite all of that, TJ juggled the ball between his hands. He might not have believed he possessed magic, but luck? He could work with luck. He and Luck were like peanut butter and jelly after all. Heck, the kids named him after Luck. With a grin and a confident bounce in his step, he passed the ball to Lamar, whose face was still red from laughter. Enjoy it now, TJ thought happily. We got this in the bag.
Yeah, get your laughs in now.
Christian guarded Lamar close, waving his stubby fingers in front of the boy's thin face.
We finna win it on the next possession.
Lamar spun around Christian with one fluid motion.
We're playing to 11, fool.
And we got 9, homie, Christian retorted, dashing after Lamar.
I know you got held back, but damn, bro. Where you gonna pull out 2 points from? I know your silly butt ain't shooting from distance.
They were playing with street ball rules. The first team to 11 would win, with each basket worth a single point and outside shots counting for double. But teams had to win by 2 in street ball. Christian must have thought they'd score a 2-pointer on their next possession. The kid never lacked in confidence, that was for sure. TJ smirked at that.
Wipe that goofy-ass smile off your face,
Jordan said to TJ as she defended another boy.
Get your head in the game.
TJ shook the expression from his mouth as the boy he was supposed to be defending blew by him. Lamar passed the ball over TJ's head and his teammate caught it with one hand, then took a jump shot way out. His shot was pretty, that same quick follow-through Steph Curry had, but without the range. The basketball thunked against the front of the double rim and flew high in the air.
Shit! Box out!
Christian shouted. But the ball was too high, which left the perimeter open for an easy long rebound for the opposing team. And, of course, TJ totally forgot to block his opponent from the rebound.
Damn it, TJ!
Christian bellowed, his loose curls bouncing atop his head as he defended close against another player. TJ's ears went hot as he got back on his man. He put one hand on the boy's sweaty school uniform, using his other to block any incoming pass. But it didn't matter. Somehow Lamar got the ball again and was dancing around Jordan. He dribbled the ball between his lanky legs and behind his narrow back. It was like he was hypnotizing Jordan with his moves, lulling her into indecision until he was ready for his final ploy. TJ had seen Lamar play enough to know he wouldn't take an outside shot. He had no jumper. All the dribbling he was doing was for show, and Jordan was falling for it. Just as Lamar committed to his final crossover, he drove by Jordan, nearly making the girl trip over her own feet. The boy had a clear path to the basket, so TJ curled away from his man and stood his ground before Lamar's bull rush. That was a mistake. The kid was at least twice TJ's size, but TJ had to make up for recent mistakes. He closed his eyes and clenched his body for impact. He watched the NBA enough to know that guys got pummeled like this all the time, but at least he could draw the foul. TJ's thin forearms braced against Lamar's ripped body as he fell back into the hard asphalt. Lamar laid the ball in with a thud against the backboard and a swish through the net, tying the game 9-9.
Nah, that's an offensive foul,
Christian called out as he waved his hands animatedly across his face. TJ's brain kept spinning without end. Christian's meaty arms looked like they doubled through TJ's blurry vision as TJ rubbed at the knot welling between the naps of his small afro. When he pulled his hand away, it was wet with blood between his middle and index fingers.
Hell nah, bruh.
Lamar sucked at his teeth.
There's no offensive fouls in pickup. This ain't no NBA.
The boys argued as TJ waited for his head to get off its carousel. Lamar started pushing at Christian and Jordan pushed back in retaliation. Guys, TJ trailed off, lightheaded and unbalanced as he struggled to his feet. The boys and girl didn't listen, clenching their fists and getting into each other's faces.
Guys,
TJ shouted too loudly as the throbbing in his head rang violently against his skull. They stopped their jawing and turned to TJ, who took a breath before he said, "Give him the point. We'll win it on the next one." He didn't want any easy calls coming his way. Lamar would just call him soft or something.
See, even Lucky Charm knows that call was bull,
Lamar said. TJ, blood still dotting his fingers, snatched the ball from Lamar's hand. It's our ball either way. Lamar shrugged and strutted down the court with his team, ready to defend. Before TJ could take the ball out, Jordan slapped him across the chest. "Good looking out back there, Lucky Charm," she said. "He had me beat." "Don't mention it." TJ craned his neck up to Jordan, whose braided head silhouetted against the high noon sun. If I can't score, the least I can do is be a wall, right? TJ threw the ball to her. Nah, you take it up the court. She threw the ball back. If you see a shot, take it. TJ almost fumbled the ball in his shaking hands. Jordan didn't actually think he could win it for them, did she? The last time TJ scored a basket in a game was last year in the 7th grade, and it was his own team's hoop. Sweat dripping down his hand and onto the ball, TJ did his best to dribble up the court. A group of other students who must have finished eating their lunch early huddled around, and the cute girls leaning on the fence drifted closer for a better look. It seemed like everyone knew the game was coming to a close. Great. TJ groaned to himself. TJ drew in a long breath, looking for that same tingle he felt before. If one thing was true, whenever he really wanted his team to win, they did. The outcome shouldn't have been any different now that the ball was in his hands. Didn't his dad always say TJ had great court vision despite not having the best jumper? He could do this. Dribbling down the court, that faint sensation returned to him. He couldn't explain it even in his own head, but something about his focus changed. It was like his teammates had sharpened in focus, like some prism was filtering out all the noise. When he got like this, TJ felt like a puppet on a string. Something deep within him made the play call before he could even figure out what that call should be. They weren't going to win this if he took the shot. The win would have to come through Jordan. It seemed like Lamar knew that too, who was already double-teaming the girl near the baseline. TJ turned his attention to his other teammates. It was like a puzzle. He just needed to find a way to get Jordan open again. And unlike Lamar's team, she could actually hit her outside shots. So TJ called for a screen at the top of the key, waving Christian over. The boy's eyes went wide with disbelief. It wasn't often that TJ called plays, let alone a pick and roll. Christian didn't even move until Jordan shouted, "Get over there and set him a screen!" Christian did as he was told and rushed over to plant his body behind TJ's defender. The boy glimmered like a prism in TJ's vision, and a new crack in the path splintered for TJ to follow. He lowered his dribble defensively and curled tight around Christian's screen, the boy's protruding belly coming in handy for that. Then TJ drove to the basket with an awkward burst of speed, putting his long legs to use. He had no intention of taking the layup. He knew he'd only miss it. But his commitment drew the attention of the other players who met him under the hoop to block his shot. TJ passed the ball back up top to Christian, who wasn't their best player but was at least a decent shooter. Just as Christian caught the ball, a clarity seemed to drift across the boy's face. TJ's heart fluttered. He had set up the play perfectly. He just needed his teammate to finish it off. Scoring a long one-pointer, where Christian stood, would only continue the game. Street ball rules required winning by 2 after all. That meant getting the ball to Jordan on the outside corner. With a pump fake, Christian forced Lamar to leave his double team on Jordan. And the moment Lamar leaped into the air to block, Christian dished it out to Jordan at the corner. TJ clenched his fist, wanting nothing more for Jordan to shoot and make the shot. Please, please, please. Jordan squared up, jumped, and followed through with a beautiful flick of her wrist. TJ bit his lip as the ball spun in a perfect revolution. It was over. He knew it would go in. After all, he was the team's lucky charm. Swish! TJ's team went wild, throwing their fists in the air, jumping high in jubilation, and rushing Jordan with bear hug after bear hug. Splash! Hand down, man down. Was homie sleeping or what? Everyone piled onto Jordan, the students who were watching, even the girls who were usually too cool to cheer. TJ couldn't help but smile. Were it not for his initial drive and his dish to Christian, Jordan might never have been open for such a good look. We call those hockey assists, Dad would always say. One of the most undervalued plays in basketball. Good looking out, Christian, Jordan hollered through the crowd. Christian dropping dimes like King James, another student said gleefully. TJ frowned. No one turned to congratulate him, not even Jordan. He couldn't say that surprised him. He hardly ever got credit. Even so, no matter how used to it he was, it still stung. And there was no use making a case for himself. It would have just looked like he was stealing Christian and Jordan's thunder. The other boys, Lamar chief among them, asked to run it back, but the bell rang, ending the lunch period. The sea of students broke up, each boy and girl grabbing their backpacks and lunch bags before heading off to their respective classes. TJ joined none of them, just the way he liked it. He used to be friends with Christian, but they had grown apart. The boy decided who he wanted to be last year, an after-school juvie with the high schoolers, smoking, getting with girls, that sort of thing. TJ preferred after-school tabletop games, drinking slushies and, well, he'd like to get with girls too if one would have him. If it hadn't been for their shared interest in basketball, TJ would have never seen Christian anymore. It didn't matter though. Friendships were overrated anyway, and not everyone was cut out for them, TJ included. Either TJ disappointed them or they disappointed him. It was better just to be the lone wolf. Well, maybe not a lone wolf. No one would ever describe TJ as a wolf. Maybe a quiet puppy or modest fox, at best. His parents just brushed off his reclusion at family reunions and birthday parties as being shy. But TJ figured he was just an introvert, which, according to the internet, meant he did better alone. He wasn't shy, exactly. He just didn't seek out attention. There was only one person he may have considered a real friend. And as lame as it may have sounded, that person was his sister, Ife Dayo Young, though TJ called her Dayo. She had been gone for 3 years now, though. She was too busy playing Wonder Woman in the streets of Abuja, or Old Oyo, or Lagos, or wherever in Nigeria she was at this point. No, not a cosplayer or one of those costume people on Hollywood Boulevard, but an actual hero. At least that's what Mom and everyone else in the family always said. TJ sighed and picked up his tattered backpack. It ripped at the bottom and barfed out a pile of folders and books. Grunting, TJ collected his supplies, hoping no one saw him. Tomo-ri? Jo-mi Loju? Young? A gruff voice said from behind. Great. Of course someone saw him. It was Principal Garcia. The stout man stood akimbo against the bright blue sky. His voice always sounded like something was caught in his throat, and he pronounced TJ's full name better than most, though it was still wrong. Just TJ, he corrected him. TJ. Garcia stopped, frowning. What's that on your shirt? TJ looked down to find a few spots of blood. Oh, nothing. Just wanted to see if red went well with the blue in my uniform. Answer? It doesn't. Garcia sighed, but didn't press the issue. Listen, son. He cleared his throat, his eyes dropping briefly to the ground before glancing back to TJ. I'm afraid I have some bad news. TJ rolled his eyes. Was it Tunde again? His brother Tunde always got himself in some sort of trouble. TJ told him he was too smart for his own good, always talking back to the teachers about their facts not being straight or riling up the wrong bullies, whose intelligence he often challenged. Granted, the kid was a little genius, already skipping 2 grades, 1 below TJ. He could almost hear his little brother's voice in his head saying, Don't worry, I'll skip another 2 so you won't embarrass me in the same classes. I think it's best you come with me, son, Mr. Garcia said sadly. An uncomfortable sensation trembled across TJ's body. Mr. Garcia wasn't one for the soft-handed approach. Sir? Is Tunde all right? Garcia took in a deep inhale. Tunde is fine. Garcia's bushy brows were free of any humor. This is about your sister. TJ's stomach went empty. What did Dayo have to do with his principal? TJ gulped before asking. What about her? Garcia drew a hand around TJ's shoulder. The gentleness in his touch only made TJ's unease worse. Come with me, son. Your family is waiting for us in my office. Chapter 2. All That's Left. TJ, your sister passed away. Those words kept hammering into his head the entire car ride. The short drive home, which that day felt more like an hour than its usual 8 minutes, was often filled with chatter. "How was your day?" And, "Do you have any homework?" That sort of thing. That afternoon, however, the car seemed to move slower than a tortoise and was as silent as a library. Dad didn't even play his typical chill tracks of Lauryn Hill or Mos Def, keeping his eyes locked to the road like it mattered, like he wasn't driving 5 miles an hour. Mom's glasses, which were 2 sizes too big for her small head but sat comfortably on her wide nose, magnified her red eyes, which had long been cried out. TJ's little brother Tunde, however, was a mess. Through the curtain of his sun-baked dreadlocks, he cried, and with each sob, TJ bit on the inside of his lip to stop himself from joining him. That would only make it worse. He considered rubbing his brother's shoulder, but they hardly ever touched each other, and it all felt very awkward. As the slow rumble of the car went on, TJ turned away from his family, from Dad's bald, unmoving head, from Mom's running nose, and from Tunde's cheeks streaming with tears. So he looked down at the armrest at his side, where a multicolored stain was melted into the faux wood. That had been his fault so many years ago. Mom told him not to leave his crayons in that little holder on a particularly warm summer's day, but TJ forgot. And when he ruined the car, it was his sister who took the blame, like she always did. She wasn't like other sisters, the ones who were always annoyed with their little brother and too cool to be bothered to spend time with him. She was better. But now, TJ, your sister is gone. A sharp pain sliced through his chest. All the air he held in since he got in the car let out in quick staccato breaths. It couldn't be true. Dio was untouchable. Everyone said so. How could she know all those spells and rituals and not be? Mom threw him a sidelong glance, and TJ sucked in his heavy breathing. He hadn't cried in front of his parents for years. Maybe whoever found Dio was mistaken. Maybe they were just a normal person who didn't know about TJ's world and the extraordinary things that could be done within it. If they did, they wouldn't have said Dio had passed away from cardiac arrest. Diviners didn't just die. Not like that. If it was true, if she was really gone, something else must have happened. Dio's smile shone brightly in TJ's mind. He had just seen a video from her a week ago on her Instagram. Sure, her hair was a mess and she looked like she could do for some sleep, but dead? Not a chance. The worst thing of it all was that while TJ gazed out the car window to the taco stands with hordes of people and the delinquent teens skateboarding down the street, or the man flipping a real estate sign through the air, the world hadn't stopped. Everyone just went about their day like the kindest person TJ had ever known, ever would know, wasn't gone. It felt wrong, and TJ resented them for it. TJ, your sister is dead. During the weekend, Dad called into Obama Charter to say TJ and Tunde wouldn't be coming back for the rest of the year. The school understood. There were only a little over 2 weeks left, so the boys wouldn't miss much. Principal Garcia had said they could be given the rest of the semester to grieve. TJ didn't like that word, grief. It meant he had to accept what he was still not ready to believe. The belief that he'd never hear Dio's energetic laugh again. The kind that was contagious. The kind that made a standard joke feel like a stand-up comic's quip. He'd never see her in the mornings again, when she often drew her thumb through his eyes to get the sleep out. But most of all, he'd never have someone to talk to like her. TJ often got overlooked. It wasn't anyone's fault, necessarily. With Dio being as talented as she was, and Tunde always testing in the top 2% in the country, it really was no wonder why TJ's mediocre efforts came as an afterthought in most circumstances. Why would anyone sit to listen to him when he couldn't conjure wind from his fingers or rebuild a computer motherboard from scratch? But it was different with Dio. She always made time to speak with him when she could. And she actually listened to him no matter what he was rambling about. From the trivial debates between nacho cheese or Cool Ranch Doritos to the more weighty topics of neighborhood displacement or police brutality that she made him read deeper into. Whatever was on TJ's mind, Dio was there to nurture a dialogue with him, challenge him to think more broadly and with more compassion. But all of that was gone now. Forever. TJ had tried to take his mind off his sister, yet none of the things he usually liked doing seemed to work. Not his mindless cell phone games, his favorite comics, or YouTube videos. The best thing he could do was sit and do nothing. Just stare up at the stucco ceiling and let the late spring breeze drift across his face through his open window. "Can you tell us what's going on?" A very fast-talking voice nagged from outside. "Do you know how Ife Dayo Young died?" TJ's toes curled at the sound of the word died. "Get out of here," TJ heard his brother saying. Flipping his legs over his bed, he rushed to his window and looked outside down to his front yard, where Tunde shooed away a squirrely-looking man in a beat-up old car. "My mom said she didn't want to talk to you or any reporter. Go away, bro." "Just one question. Is it true Ife Dayo Young was fighting against the—" TJ didn't hear the rest of the man's question. Tunde waved the trash bag in his hand at the man like he was a pesky fly. Part of TJ wished Tunde hadn't done that. He wanted to know who Dio was fighting against. A constant scratching came at TJ's bedroom door, followed by light whimpering. He crossed his bedroom and opened his door to find Simba, the family dog. Before TJ could so much as pet him, the golden white spotted Russell Terrier sped off downstairs. TJ followed the dog down to the foyer, which was littered with packages from people all over who gave their condolences. Simba bounded over hills of flowers and through tunnels of boxes like it was nothing. TJ followed as best he could, not wanting to crush the keepsake photo album his grandfather had sent from Nigeria, or the gourmet healing candles from Elder Akande in Louisiana, or the enchanted throw pillows that vaulted out of TJ's path from some bruxa in Brazil. Simba didn't stop until he came to the sliding door at the back of the house, which led out into the backyard. This was his universal language for, "I gotta pee, fool." TJ tussled with the back door for a few moments. It often jammed up. Dad had said he'd fix it, but he simply didn't have the time between his work and basketball camps. And Mom didn't have the money to spare to call a repairman. Everything in the house half worked, not so broken that it needed immediate replacing, but enough of an inconvenience to earn complaints from everyone in the family. After a few more tugs, TJ slid the door open and Simba bounded for his special corner in the backyard, between the frog fountain and garden, to do his canine duties. TJ had to admit it felt nice outside. The sky was cloudless, the wind delicate against his arms, and the birds sang a nice afternoon melody as smells of barbecue wafted over the backyard fence from one of the neighbors. But like the rest of the weekend, TJ couldn't find any joy in the pleasantries. It didn't seem fair when Dio lay on some cold slab of metal, getting poked and prodded by some mortician who didn't care or know her at all. She would have loved the weather today. Spring was her favorite time of the year. She always took TJ to Kenneth Hahn Park to feed the ducks or watch the koi fish swim under large lily pads. Sometimes she did her best to teach TJ some magic, but he always failed her in that way. He tried to mumble one of the ritual phrases she shared with him, a simple incantation that was supposed to manifest water from his fingertips. But like always, nothing had happened. TJ grunted internally. Regardless of what he did or wherever he went, he could not take his mind off his sister. Psst, psst. A hissing voice came from the garden. But no one was there, save for Simba, who was just then covering his poop in the dirt. Psst, psst. Hello? TJ asked hesitantly to the open air. Over here! A long strand of ivy that curled over the backyard's brick wall lifted up and down like someone waving. TJ sprang back, which made Simba yelp. Sorry, don't get all jumpy. The voice, or rather the hanging talking ivy, said in a female Nigerian accent. Name's Chika Ogonseye.
I've just got a few questions from the Eshu Messenger Press. Hold on. I have them just here. The talking ivy stretched out a second vine over the wall, this one holding a sheet of paper. My brother already told the other guy to get lost, TJ scowled. Simba bared his teeth at the intruder, growling all the while. Who? Akinteme from Divination Today? He's a bum! No, the Eshu Press is the real thing. Very respectable. Says the talking vine who's intruding into my backyard. The she-vine waved TJ's words away like a human would, then pulled out a third vine with glasses in its grip, which she used to read her sheet of paper. TJ couldn't see what for when she didn't even have any eyes. Fast question. She cleared her throat. What was the true death of Ifedayo Young? True death? What are you talking about? The true death, young one. Everyone knows cardiac arrest is called in the Divina community as Afefe Wasimi. A tiny gust of wind swirled at their side, and Tunde came running from the house. We told you all to get. He threw an uppercut. Out! A magical wind rushed up. Of! The ivy woman swirled in a gust. Our house! With a final flourish of his hands, Tunde forced Chica the reporter off their wall and back out into the street. But not before she exclaimed, You can't hide the truth! Don't make me report you to the UCMP, Tunde shouted back. The UCMP was the United Council of Magical Peoples. This house is protected. We know our rights. As though reinforcing the point, Simba barked and growled at the wall at Tunde's heels. The lingering spell wind whipped at TJ's cheeks as his eyes went wide in astonishment. He'd seen his little brother use his ashe before, but never with such force. Even if it was a tiny gust of wind, it still packed a punch. And the neighbors could have seen him. Mrs. Lindsay was always being nosy. They didn't live in one of the hidden magical hubs in the States, so they had to be careful. Jumping up to peek over the fence, TJ could see a round woman toppled over on the sidewalk with little green vines sinking into her skin. She brushed dirt off her blouse, gave TJ a nasty look, then walked down the street as though nothing had happened. Don't tell Mom, Tunde spouted quickly to TJ, as though reading his older brother's thoughts. 1, I'm not supposed to use my ashe during the day, and 2, Mom told me to enchant the walls with a repelling spell last night, but then Dad asked me to do all these chores. You know how it go. Yeah, Mom asked me to do magic all the time. Tunde punched TJ on the shoulder. You'll get it. Eventually. 14 years of my life disagrees with you. Yeah, well, Tunde shrugged, gave TJ a blank stare for a moment, then took awkward steps backward. So, I gotta do the rest of the walls? Clean this up for me, will you? TJ turned to see the garden left in a mess, including Simba's fresh droppings splattered on the brick wall. Cupping his hands over his mouth, TJ called out, Dude, not cool. You know your ass can manifest some water or something and wash this up. The hose is right there, Tunde called back from around the corner, already out of sight. TJ glanced at the disarray again, sighed and got to work. After turning on the hose, he did 3 very lazy passes across the wall. He'd let his parents tell him he didn't do a good job later if they noticed. But just as he was wrapping the hose up again, he noticed a damp sheet of paper atop one of Mom's sunflowers. It looked like the same one that the reporter was holding. The ink was all blotchy from dews of water, but TJ could still read it. Questions for young family. True magical COD? Fight with keepers? Vigilante? Quarreled with Elder Adeyemi? I am the falling star. The falling star is me. Last words, perhaps? TJ stopped reading after that. It was a very, very long list. All the questions had their own intrigue. Yet what halted him straight away was that 5th line about falling stars. He would have sworn he heard something like it before. Where, though? And what had Dayo gotten herself into? TJ only vaguely recognized the name Keepers from when Mom watched Divination Today, but he wasn't sure who Elder Adeyemi was. And his sister? A vigilante?
Was that a bad or good thing? Then it occurred to him where he'd seen those words about falling stars before. Dayo's room. Chapter 3. Wishing on a Star. Wrapping the rest of the hose up, TJ fanned the reporter's notepaper dry, then tucked it into his pocket. As he made his way back to the backyard sliding door into the house, Simba bounced at his heels. With 3 short heaves and a pair of jerks, TJ pried it open, but a mountain of fabric blocked his path. Simba jumped over a clump of red and blue clothes and raced into the cramped back room with the washer and dryer. "I'm sorry, baby," Mom called from the end of the adjoining kitchen. "Let me get that out of your way." She waved her fingers distractedly, and the fabric, which TJ could now see were cuts of asooke, magically floated from the foot of the door to the top of the dryer, where more clothing seemed to sew itself in intricate Yoruba designs. What was Mom doing? Just an hour ago, she was weeping in her room like she had been all weekend. But now she hustled and bustled around the tiny kitchen as if stopping would bring back her sorrow. TJ frowned as he realized she was doing the same thing he had tried to do. Distract herself with anything. Everything. And now, she was busying herself with funeral preparations. Yoruba funerals were not like normal American ones. For one, they weren't just a single day, but a week-long affair. The day before, Mom had said Dayo's ceremony was going to start on Monday and end the following Sunday in a quasi-Yoruba American funeral at Inglewood Cemetery. Mom was sewing the asooke together for all the guests that would attend throughout the week. And judging by the fabrics that lay atop the cabinets, the drawers, the freezer, and the fridge, it seemed like half of Los Angeles was coming out. Mom shuffled between the kitchen, dining, and washing rooms like a busy beaver as she recited the sewing ritual, which brought the rooms to life with self-sewing needles and floating scissors. As Mom zigged and zagged, her towering dreadlocks seemed to sway like a palm tree in the wind, and just when it looked like her hair would topple over, it set itself straight again in perfect balance. "Did you get in touch with Priest Glover, Iya?" Mom asked what looked like a computer screen filled with cascading water, which dipped in and out of a large wooden bowl, a common communication device among diviners, not unlike a video call for non-magical people. Despite not living in Nigeria for years, Mom always slipped back into that Niger cadence like she had never left. Within the sheet of revolving water, an old, wizened face with the same wide nose as Mom spoke with a thick Nigerian accent. "Why you always wanting Glover for, eh? Babalawo Akande is always doing a better job if you want a proper celebration." It wasn't uncommon for a Yoruba funeral to have professional dancers and the like among the procession. TJ had always thought of them as hype men or a studio audience, stirring up cheers and laughter. TJ never understood the tradition. Funerals were meant for quiet and introspection, not noise and jubilation. "Glover doesn't get too loud," Mom said, orchestrating a set of needles through a new collection of fabrics. "Whenever Akande shows up, she whoops and hollers too much. People get uncomfortable." Grandma sucked her teeth. "Too loud for you Americans. And what about the casket and flowers? How are you paying for it all?" "Oh, I've got a favor to pull." "Favor? You know we never take charity. An ambibola always pays." "An ambibola always pays," Mom repeated. "Don't worry, Iya. They know I'm good for it. I just can't do it all at once." Grandma looked unconvinced. "And don't go selling family heirlooms, you hear?" A scowl stretched across her face. Then her mouth shifted into a small O as her translucent eyes met TJ. "Is that Tomori Jomiloju? Tell him to stop hiding behind that wall and say hello to his Iya Agba." "Hello, Grandma," TJ said sheepishly. No. She tisk-tissed.
Eka sani yagba. Chedandani.
TJ trailed off uncomfortably. He knew she said, "You say to me, hello, grandmother," or something like that in Yoruba, and he knew how to respond, but he was always uneasy about verbalizing the words. He always got the intonation wrong. So he stood there with his eyebrows scrunched together.
Oh, you looking just like your baba every day?
She beamed, water ripples flowing down her cheeks.
How are you feeling?
TJ would have liked to pull out the note in his jeans and ask what they knew about it. He decided against it, of course. He'd rather figure it out on his own before getting Mom or Grandma involved. Mom was liable to take it from him and ask where he got it from. No, that wouldn't work. He knew he saw that line about falling stars somewhere in Dayo's room. TJ must have put on a downer face in his turmoil because Mom cut in.
Iya, tell me if I am doing this sewing spell right. I think the hems are too loose.
Grandma kissed her teeth again.
The hems are loose because you don't speak Yoruba enough anymore. When are you going to visit me?
She continued the rest of her tirade in her mother tongue, speaking too fast for TJ to keep up. Even if she spoke slowly and clearly, he still would have had an issue following what was essentially a foreign language to him. Before she could turn her rapid-fire Yoruba back on him, TJ slipped out of the kitchen and into the family room. He was halfway back to the foyer with its obstacle course of gifts and keepsakes when a light sound of sniffling halted him. He had entered from behind the sole couch in the room, unaware that his father had been lying there with his hand on his forehead. All TJ could see was his father's shiny bald head. A lump welled up in TJ's throat. Was his father crying? TJ had never as much as seen his father get teary-eyed, let alone this. Suddenly, an uncomfortable sensation washed over him, and he made sure not to press the heel of his foot into the loose floorboard under the rug as he stepped forward. When TJ saw what his father was looking at, though, he couldn't blame his tears. Dad held his cell phone in his hand, scrolling through old videos of Dayo when she was a toddler. Even when she was young, her smiles and laughter were infectious. Each time she let out a giggle, the younger voice of his father snickered back, and the two found themselves in an endless ping-pong of chuckles. However, it seemed like with each burst of laughter from past Dad, it brought a new sob from present-day Dad, which the man tried to suppress with a hand. TJ backpedaled from the room, holding his breath as not to disturb his father. As he climbed the stairs back up to the second floor, he found a whimpering Simba clawing at Dayo's bedroom door. TJ knelt to pet the little dog behind the ears and wondered if he knew what had happened to her. Dayo always said that animals were more in tune with their ashe than humans in many ways. TJ opened the door to the bright room of blues and lavenders, Dayo's favorite colors. Though the slanted ceiling made the room seem cramped, Dayo's room was still larger than TJ and Tunde's room, which the pair had to share as the only two boys in the family. Dayo's room didn't have much. Only a small twin bed and a tiny desk sat in a nook near the room's only window. TJ could barely see the desk. Every inch of it was covered in all sorts of awards, from swim meets to writing achievements. Most of the accolades, however, were humanitarian. Mom had painted the walls with the images of the many Orishas, the ethereal forces that fuel diviners in their magic. From the sky deity Obatala to Oko of the earth, and Olokun of the deep blue sea. At night when the room grew dark, the paint glowed a majestic gold like fireflies in the night. TJ had loved sneaking into Dayo's room when he was younger. They used to stay up late into the night talking about anything and everything until Mom and Dad banged on the walls. TJ? Dayo? Stop that noise and go to bed, they would say. Despite himself, a curl of a smile crept across the edge of TJ's mouth at the memory. Simba went straight for Dayo's bed, sinking his nose into her pillows. Even though she hadn't lived there for 3 years, it still smelled like her, that hint of honeydew fragrance she favored. TJ went through her closet first, looking for anything that mentioned falling stars. Like everything in her room, it was immaculate and orderly. It felt wrong going through her things, but he kept everything as tidy as it was before he started looking. At the top of the closet was a shoebox that read, IFA Academy, 2019. TJ got to his tiptoes and clawed for it, but he couldn't quite reach. He stretched again, knocking his elbow into something hard. A long shaft thudded against the shag carpet that rested under Dayo's bed. TJ stood with hunched shoulders, hoping no one heard the tumble. It was Dayo's staff, the prized possession of a diviner. Mom must have put it there after her body came back Saturday morning. Tough mahogany wood made up its shaft, which twisted around a jagged crystal that shimmered a shade of lime against the afternoon light streaking through the room. Simba jumped from the bed to sniff the staff, then started licking the crystal as though it were a treat. "No, stop that, Simba!" TJ shooed the dog away as he picked the staff up. Despite its twisting nature, it felt smooth and polished yet firm to his grip, like something unseen locked his hand into place. When Dayo had first let him touch her staff, she told him it was his ashe binding him to the wood. Too bad he could do nothing with it. But he could hear his sister's voice clear inside his head. "Don't try so hard," she said kindly. "You'll never get it to work if you try to force it out. You've got to breathe and be at peace. Feel how your ashe flows through you and everything else in this room." Across the room rested a portrait of Dayo and her best friend, Adeola. They wrapped each other in a tight embrace with their graduation robes, smiles wide and bright. Around its frame in cursive writing read the words, "Wishing on a star to follow where you are. May we find our shooting stars as they fall and rise with the guiding hands of Orumila." That was it. But what did it even mean? It wasn't exactly a match to what was on the reporter's paper. TJ knew Orumila was another Orisha, the one Dayo aligned with, but not much else. The staff vibrated between TJ's fingers, and that familiar tingle rolled through their tips. Perhaps he could call the picture to his hand like Dayo sometimes did. TJ lifted the staff above his head, recalling the lesson his sister tried to impart to him. Somehow it felt like she had never left, like she was there just at his shoulder giving him words of encouragement. "Don't try so hard," TJ told himself. "Aworan wasimi." TJ recited the incantation, but nothing happened. The picture didn't even move an inch. TJ repeated himself, but still, same result. Nothing. After his third attempt, he closed his eyes, saying the words faster and faster, hoping to hear the rush of a picture frame soaring toward him. He opened his eyes. Nothing changed. Simba looked up to him with a lazy tongue and a wagging tail. It should have worked. He knew it was going to work. But for whatever reason, the staff didn't listen to him as it should have. What did he have to do to get his ashe to function properly? Everyone in his family, except Dad and his own family, who were very unmagical, could do it. Maybe that was the problem. Perhaps he got Dad's non-magical genes, whereas his little brother and older sister lucked out with their mothers. But TJ knew it wasn't true. Several times in his life, he had felt the energy force his sister always talked about. He knew it was there, deep down, like it was behind some hidden veil he just couldn't see through. Grunting, TJ twisted back to the closet and stuffed Dayo's staff back where he found it. When he closed the door, a gentle wind drifted past his neck. TJ looked to see if the window was open, but it was sealed shut. Simba started to sniff the air, whipping his head from left to right in search of something unseen. TJ turned to the picture again, but it still sat unmoving. Where had that wind come from? He didn't just imagine it, did he? TJ opened the closet and eyed the staff again. It could have been a trick of the light, yet it seemed like the crystal lodged in the wood glowed green. No, it couldn't have been the light. Darkness shadowed the closet. Simba nuzzled TJ's leg, and the pair of them stared at each other. They weren't alone in that room. Chapter 4, The Promised Child. For the next week, TJ must have visited Dayo's room a dozen times between all the days of her funeral arrangements. Yet never, not even once, did he feel or sense anything again.
And he still couldn't for the life of him figure out what all the falling star business was about, no matter how many times he listened to Rose Royce back and front. During the first 2 days relegated to prayer and donations to fund the week's events, spiritually and monetarily alike, TJ had tried to replicate exactly what he did the first time he stepped into Dayo's room. But for the whole of those pair of days, all he could do was nearly give himself an aneurysm for all his wasted concentration and his obviously shoddy attempt at prayer. He figured he should have appealed to Arunmila, Dayo's Orisha, but even that didn't seem to garner results. On the next day of Itaoku, the day of feasting and celebration of life, when Simba kept asking TJ for table scraps, he remembered that his dog had been in the room with him when that weird sensation danced around his neck. Yet despite putting his dog on the bed between Dayo's pillow like before, his pet's presence didn't change a thing. On the next few days, which were filled with light-hearted games, TJ watched his cousins as they played Eshu's crossover, a magical game he could take no part in. Unlike his typical pickup games, crossover required more than mere tingling in the fingers or all-star teamwork. Many of his cousins used air stepping to dodge and slip each other in a game more akin to ultimate frisbee or capture the flag than basketball. On magical steroids, of course. That said, their movements inspired TJ to try the same wind magic in his sister's room. Perhaps that would rekindle whatever sensation had been there before. After hours of fiddling with Dayo's staff and reciting Yoruba phrases he was likely butchering, the best he could do was make himself go hoarse, though he thought he was getting somewhere when he smelled an odd odor. It turned out to be Simba passing gas. Despite his best efforts over the week, each time he stepped into her room, nothing happened. No ghostly gusts or odd sensations through his veins. Irked and defeated, TJ had finally resolved that whatever he felt that day was merely his imagination, a fixation his mind wanted desperately to be true. So came the second to last day of the funeral festivities, Ireoku, the most significant day. Though the week was filled with family and friends, almost like a mini reunion brimming with tears and laughter, Mom said it was nothing compared to what they planned for the finale. That Saturday morning, the family drove to the final ceremonial day in silence, all dressed in traditional Yoruba clothing. TJ and Tunde in the back, Mom and Dad in the front. Like everyone else in their immediate family, Mom wore a collection of blue and purple asooke. Today, she dressed in a big gele head tie with a buba blouse, bele shawl, and iro wraparound skirt. TJ and the rest of the males in the car wore fila caps, buba shirts, agbada tunics, and shokoto trousers. TJ thought he'd be hot in all the fabrics, but the wide cuffs and loose hangings crafted a nice breeze between his legs and arms. As they rounded the corner of La Brea and Centinela, Tunde squinted and lifted his chin over his father's shoulder to ask, "Are all those people here for what I think they are?" "Oh my goodness," Mom gasped as she rolled down her window. The wind drifting through the car brought with it a scent of incense and spice, like the Pan-African festivals TJ's family often went to. A horde of people garbed in African fabrics and headdresses filled the city streets like a rainbow sea of blues, greens, reds, and oranges. TJ tried to count them all as they drove by, but he stopped at 123. At least 1,000 clustered shoulder to shoulder as the crowd waited for the youngs to arrive. When a few patrons in the crowd recognized their car, they waved merrily, some hopping up and down. "Priest Glover said he lost count," Mom said, pride welling in her eyes. "Everyone from the Divina community must be here. From the West Coast, East Coast, down south the islands, even all the way from Benin in Nigeria." Tunde gasped from the seat beside TJ. Dayo knew all these people? "Of course not, baby." Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "But she meant a lot to very many." "How long does this parade go on for?" TJ asked as Dad pulled their car into the grocery store lot where a banner reading, "Funeral Parking," slung over a Ralph's sign. Mom smiled brightly again. We've shut down Centinela from La Brea all the way to the cemetery.
TJ gawked as his father turned off the car. He knew Dio was some sort of hero in Nigeria, but he always thought it was local, not national, and definitely not global. The sheet of paper in his pocket beneath all the garb brushed against his thigh like a pin-pricking reminder. It had said Dio was being accused of being a vigilante, and he still hadn't worked out what that meant. I thought you diviners were supposed to be a secret, Dad grunted.
It'll be all right.
Mom waved a dismissive hand.
We've got officials from the UCMP watching over everything. No one's allowed to use their ashe. And to any passerby, it would look like a normal African appreciation parade.
Normal parade? Dad questioned skeptically. Y'all brought half the motherland to South Central. When the young family finally found their way to the center of the crowd where TJ's close cousins held up Dio's casket, the parade began in merry fervor. Drums thumped, trumpets belted loud tunes, and a woman TJ could not see through the masses sang out a traditional Yoruba song. The smell of fruits and berries wafted off everyone's clothes as they spun and tapped their feet to the music. TJ walked alongside Dio's casket, bedecked in fresh lavenders and fragrant blue sea hollies, her favorite. It had been the closest he'd been to her body since she left. He thought if he strained his ears enough, he could hear her laughter, but it had to be his imagination. Even as the men who held up the casket bounced up and down to the rhythmic music, the decorations remained in place. The casket was more secure than a military bunker. Mom must have wrangled enough money through donations to get Dio the very best. But one side of the coffin hung low and lopsided as one man stomped instead of danced. Though the others wore wide smiles and sang along with the hymns, Dad's eyes looked deadpan and vacant. Like TJ, he must have not found Dio's death to be cause for celebration. Mom and Tunde, however, were swept up in the fervor, Mom clapping and Tunde pounding away on his agba drum. Perhaps it was a cultural divide. Sometimes TJ only found common ground with his father when in the presence of the magical, or, in this case, West Africans. How could they be in such high spirits when Dio lay dead only feet away? She'd never wake again, never sing or dance like the others, never pound on a drum, or cast another spell. All of that was taken from her without warning because of some cardiac arrest that was apparently a code for something else TJ couldn't figure out. TJ thought funerals were supposed to be quiet and somber, reflective and pensive, not loud and boisterous like the Lakers had just won a championship. Noticing what must have been TJ's stony gaze, Mom put a hand around his shoulder and rubbed it gently. It's great, isn't it? TJ wanted to say, he guessed so, but that would only make Mom sad. Who was he to bring her down? So instead he said, it's something. She smiled, seemingly satisfied with TJ's response. So many important people are here. This would mean so much to your sister. Mom pointed to the surrounding crowd. Just there is Olufemi Bolawe. She pointed to a tall man with pores the size of craters in a black and orange tunic who, unlike the others, walked a steady pace with a neutral face. He knew Ifedayo well. They were working together in Nigeria. TJ gave the man a second examination. Maybe he knew what really happened to Dio. And just there, Mom continued, shouting so she could be heard over the crowd. A few feet from Bolawe is Elder Simisola Adeyemi. Some say she's the greatest diviner of her generation. She nodded to a woman equally tall as the man with sparkling earrings. Though the woman was probably 60, maybe even 70, the shimmering makeup dabbed around her eyes looked like it belonged on someone half her age. And over there, that's Xavier Dubois, one of the instructors at the summer camp down in... Oh, is that... Mom craned her neck over a gleeful man plucking at a string instrument TJ didn't recognize. Adeola, is that you?
TJ's eyes widened at the sound of the name. Adeola was Dayo's best friend. He had met her a few times when he and Dayo visited her up in Oakland, or when she visited them in Los Angeles. He remembered having the biggest crush on her and getting instantly shut down. She made up for it by playing him in Mario Kart, though. So that was cool. "Mrs. Young?" Adeola called out as she pressed her way through the throng of people. Like his mother, she wore an elaborate head tie and a vibrant dress, though her colors were emerald and canary. She and Dayo shared in their almond eyes and slender faces. Though where Dayo's smile was straight, even and wide, Adeola's grin always came at a thin slant, and TJ remembered that her nickname was Cheekbones because they were particularly distinct. Her nose, like always, was never free from some new nose piercing, and that day she had a bull's nose ring. "I thought that was you." Mom left TJ's side to embrace Adeola. "I knew a lot of us would show up, but..." Adeola broke the hug to look around. Several Nigerian flags blocked out the sun and shadowed her face. "I never would have thought this many would pay their respects to Dayo." The tears in Mom's eyes ran freely, renewed and ruining her makeup. "Hey, Dayola," TJ said softly, eyes low. Maybe Adeola didn't remember him. Adeola's expression brightened when she finally glanced to TJ. "No way. Tomori Jomiloju? That can't be you. You're taller than I am now." "Dad says us youngs hit our growth spurts right before high school." "Go on. Go and say hello to the others," Adeola said to Mom. "Kiara and Titilayo are just over there. I'll look after Tomori. We got some catching up to do." Mom gave Adeola 2 light kisses on her cheek and shuffled deeper into the crowd to say her hellos. TJ found himself transfixed by the Ide beads wrapped around Adeola's wrist. They were red, pink, and burgundy, and all seemed to shimmer in the daylight. "Do you remember whose colors these are?" she asked TJ, who tried to act like he wasn't looking. A familiar sting of embarrassment curled through his stomach whenever he was quizzed on the Orishas. How could anyone remember them all? The priest said there were at least 401 of them, possibly more. Was all TJ could get out before Adeola jabbed him on the shoulder playfully. "Don't trip," she chuckled. "Yewa isn't well known, even to the elders. These colors represent her. She's the Orisha of graveyards," TJ finished sadly, remembering her role once Adeola named her. It made sense considering where they were. "Yeah," she trailed off. He could barely hear her over all the drums and commotion. "I don't get it," TJ scowled, bumping shoulders with a teenage girl dancing with a sparkling sign of Dayo that winked magically on a loop, which was promptly taken away by a uniformed official wearing shades and all-white robes. "Everyone's cheering and singing like there's something to be happy about." "Well," Adeola started, pursing her already thin lips as though considering her next words. "Your sister did a lot in life that's worth praise like this. I knew she was top of her class and all that, and yeah, she helped a lot of people, I know that, but all of this?" TJ gestured to the festivities. "There's something I gotta be missing." Then it hit him. How could he forget until just then? "Oh, dude, this reporter came to our house last week and they dropped this." He fumbled in his robes as he pulled out the reporter's note. "Maybe you know something about it. It talks about the keepers. And what does this stuff here mean about falling star? It's on that frame of you guys in her room." Adeola's eyes went sharp. "Your mother never told you about the promised child stuff?" "Promised child? What's that?" Adeola's narrowed eyes softened slightly. Her lips parted for a moment, but she bit down as though she were keeping herself from saying anything else. "If your mother didn't say anything, it's not my place to..." "No, you can't just do that." TJ tugged at her arm. "What did she not tell me?" Adeola's eyes shifted from left to right to the crowd as she removed TJ's hand from her arm. "I have to go, Tomori. We'll catch up later, yeah?" She walked off, stopped, turned back on her heel, then flitted her fingers toward TJ. "And you shouldn't have that." The piece of paper started to wiggle out of TJ's fingers.
TJ stared down at it as it did its little shimmy away from the pinch of his forefinger and thumb until it was finally free. It floated like a leaf in the wind until it landed in Adeola's hand. "Wait, stop!" TJ outstretched a hand, but Adeola disappeared into the crowd. After a few moments of shouldering through the sea of people, with one too many bump-ins with emerald-robed women he thought was Adeola, TJ gave up. A shaded part of the street covered by a maple tree became a resting point for him as he searched for Mom. So, TJ thought, Dio was some sort of promised child? What did that even mean? And why hadn't Mom told him about it? As he stared out to the crowd, the enormous, unending crowd, he wondered if they knew it too. But they couldn't have. He watched the same news everyone else did. Divination Today was on every morning in his house. Plus, he had a first-row seat to everything Dio did. Well, maybe not for the last 3 years. The last 3 years, it was more like he was in the nosebleeds. Not once, though, did anyone mention her being a promised child. A hero, sure. A humanitarian all the time. Promised child? Never. Maybe it was just a nickname, something interchangeable with all the other monikers Dio picked up over the years. TJ wondered where all the reporters were. This was all a pretty big event, after all. Surely they were doing their snooping. Then he remembered the big guy with the shades and the all-white robes. Now that he looked around a bit more astutely, he could see more men and women in similar robes on the edges of the parade, acting like they weren't overwatching everyone else. There probably were some reporters snooping around, but, like the little girl with her sign, they likely got shut down. When TJ decided all his thinking was leading to a headache, he rejoined the crowd where he followed the hymns that surrounded his sister's casket. Eventually, he caught back up to Dad, Tunde, and Mom, who was still speaking with other people in the crowd. TJ wanted to butt in with questions of Dio, even though it would have been rude. And once the sign reading Inglewood Park Cemetery crested over the congregation's caps and head ties, TJ finally mustered the courage to interrupt his mother. "What's a promised child?" he asked. Mom's face went several shades lighter, a testament against her dark complexion. Despite the change of color in her skin, she acted as though she didn't hear TJ. "Mom, did you hear me?" TJ asked again, but Mom waved to another guest and started a very loud conversation with him. Fine. She could ignore him for now, but eventually she'd have to answer him. So TJ played along, waiting for the right moment to hit her with his questions. But each time he thought he found a moment with Mom, something always came up. A new relative that wanted to catch up, a cemetery worker who needed something answered, or a friend or a stranger giving their condolences. TJ would have gone looking for Adeola again on his own, but any time he wandered off from his mother's side, she hissed and snapped her fingers, directing him to stand right back where he was. This was the only time she didn't ignore him, and any time he opened his mouth in question, he was met with a "hush, not right now" from her. The crowd dwindled from 1,000 to a few hundred once TJ, his family, and select invited guests made their way through the private cemetery, surrounded by high stone walls topped with spiked and black fences. The wake ceremony was beautiful, set along the cemetery's lone lake with a simple fountain in its center. Green grass and tombstones flanked the water on all sides, and a great white tent covered the rows of chairs that faced Dio's casket, shielding all from the high noon sun. TJ barely noticed most of it. Throughout the ceremony and its speeches, despite sitting in the first row, TJ pondered on all that was said during the parade. He almost lost track of time when his brother poked him in the side. "It's time to go look at her," Tunde said with a shaky voice. He must have wanted TJ to go look first. TJ hesitated, a hefty weight magnetizing him to his seat. Was he ready to see his sister? Just last week, he complained he couldn't wait to see her at the funeral home. Now, he wasn't so sure he could take the 4 steps to see her at her own funeral. Lifting himself from his seat with a stilted sigh, TJ followed behind his parents, who took the first turn to view Dio's body. Along with the floral decorations atop the coffin, a a collection of Dayo's personal possessions flanked the sides. A statuette of Arumila, the Orisha of wisdom, her staff, whose single emerald crystal gleamed under the afternoon light, a bowl of peaches, her favorite fruit, and many other items associated with Dayo in one way or another. The mood had changed since the parade leading to the cemetery. Now it felt more like the tone TJ had anticipated. A respectful and almost eerie quiet punctured only by sniffles, blown noses, and the chirping of birds. For the second time, Mom cried, though this time she sobbed into her handkerchief so her tears wouldn't fall on Dayo's body. Dad held a steady hand on her back, rubbing her only when her weeping grew to outright shakes. Unlike a week before, Dad held a strong face free of tears. He must have got all he needed out in the house. Perhaps that was a one-time occurrence TJ would never witness again. After a few moments, it was TJ and Tunde's turn. TJ didn't know what he was expecting when he saw Dayo's body, but he didn't think he would feel so normal about it. It didn't look like she was dead at all. He'd even say she looked better than the time when she had been on Instagram a few weeks before. Where her face once looked gaunt, now, thanks to the work done by whoever did her makeup, her skin looked healthy and full. It just looked like she was sleeping, as though she would wake up at any moment. But after staring at her for a full minute, the stillness in her chest made it all the more final. TJ's eyes stung like every onion in the world up and decided to relocate just under his lids. He had cried several times over the past week, yet that was in the privacy of his own room when Tunde wasn't around. This, however, was different. A pang of guilt lanced through him, making him stiff and rigid. Why was he so embarrassed to cry in front of the guests? It was expected, encouraged. Why couldn't he let himself weep and mourn? He knew why, deep down. He just wasn't ready to admit it yet, knowing that the moment he did, it would be the final crack on top of the mounting grief he had suppressed that whole week. That's what really fueled all his interest in the reporter's notes. What motivated all his questions to Mom as they entered the cemetery. To settle in one place and allow himself to think would only lead to the tears that dropped onto his folded hands at that moment. The reality of Dayo's inert body sank in all its totality, and TJ's tears kept coming freely, and he allowed them to. He welcomed them. Without thinking, TJ reached out to touch her arms folded across her chest. As his fingers brushed along her smooth hand, a shock wave spiked through his arms, making his skin prickle with goosebumps from an energy that he couldn't describe. Yet, it felt familiar somehow. The vibrations were more like the way he felt when Dayo hugged him, like the way it felt when she laughed at his bad jokes. It was like no, it couldn't be possible. He knew it couldn't. But it felt like her essence was inside him, coursing through his blood, racing down his spine. Flashes of colors ran across his eyes and his body started to spasm. Mom's scream came loud before his head hit the ground. Hard. Chapter 5. Shapes and Sounds. TJ, can you hear me? Oh, baby, please, wake up. Is he breathing? What happened? The voices came in and out like a radio station being tuned in from too far a source. TJ could only make out a word or a phrase, but never full sentences. His head swam in a space between reality and dreams. He couldn't see exactly, his sight replaced with a collage of colors like a kaleidoscope in his mind's eye. He wanted to wake, wanted to tell the voices he was all right, but he couldn't find his sense of self. There was nothing of him any longer. No feet, no hands, no breathing even. Just the shapes and sounds. The hues swirling around him appeared almost as figures. Colossal shapes that watched over him. One near the middle looked particularly familiar, almond-shaped eyes and a wide smile. A deep tone pierced the abyss of sound, a rhythmic melody of a Yoruba prayer TJ didn't understand. As he listened to the words, he could feel his feet brush against the groove of his dress shoes, his toes rubbing against his cotton socks.
Look there! Look there! Was that his feet?
Yes, it's my feet, TJ tried to say, but his own voice was still lost to the void. The prayer continued, its words vibrating through his legs and up to his belly.
He's breathing! Thank the Orishas, he's breathing!
TJ's fingers curled into a loose fist and he could feel a cool breeze trail across his knuckles, could feel blades of grass tickling his skin.
Tomori Jomiloju, it's your mother. Listen to my voice.
Slowly, TJ opened his eyes to the white tent. Several shapes stood above him, not unlike the shapes in his dream, each of them silhouetted against the bright tent roof. Turning his head a bit, he could make out the green grass and the tombstones embedded in them next to the blue lake and the fountain within it. Sweat soaked TJ's clothes. He felt like he had just played a game of full-court basketball.
Give him some space, Yejide,
came Dad's voice. The shadowed figure that had to be Dad pulled at another with a large head tie. Mom. TJ suddenly became aware of a large hand engulfing his forehead, 2 fingers at each side of his temples. The figure closest to him spoke with a strong baritone, reciting his prayer. Was that the voice he had heard in his reverie? It had to be. A tuft of grass brushed against the back of TJ's neck as his eyes focused in on the figure that loomed over him. The indistinct shadows materialized into features of people, of loved ones. Mom stood to his left, wrapped up in Dad's broad arms, blotched makeup spotted around her bloodshot eyes. Tunde stood just behind them, looking close to tears himself. But closest to TJ was the man Mom pointed out before, Olufemi Bolawe, if TJ remembered correctly. His eyes were serious and dark, sweat glistening atop his slightly protruded brow and into the valley of his deep crater-like pores.
Thank you, Olufemi,
Mom managed to choke out. The man named Mr. Bolawe lifted his hand from TJ's forehead and wiped his own.
Thought we lost you there for a bit,
he said deeply.
We can't stand to lose another young so soon.
TJ gave him a weak smile, but it felt like he could only manage a grimace, at best.
Olufemi?
Mom put a light hand on the man's shoulder.
You look exhausted. Go get yourself some water from the bar.
Yes, you're probably right, he trailed off, his eyes shifting between TJ and something just out of view. The focus in his expression broke as fatigue truly set into the bags under his eyes. Whatever this Bolawe guy did to bring TJ back must have taken a lot out of him.
Tomori?
This is the man I was telling you about. Mom nodded to Mr. Bolawe, seeming to read the confusion on TJ's face.
Olufemi Bolawe. He and your sister were close. He taught her in her first few years at Ifa Academy, before I led a very unsuccessful political career,
Bolawe grunted, lifting to his feet. He held a hand out for TJ, who took it and hefted himself up with the help of the man.
I'm truly sorry about your sister. Her death was a massive loss to our community. Massive.
The man's words sounded more genuine than the others TJ had heard all day. There was true sorrow in them, true gravity, and his words reached his eyes. TJ could see now that the man had many smile lines around his eyes. But in all the time he spoke, he never as much as smirked. How long had it been since he did? TJ wondered. TJ surveyed the other people surrounding them. It sounded like half the guests were huddled around, judging by the number of murmuring voices. TJ caught sight of the woman who had been speaking with Mr. Bolawe. Elder Adeyemi was her name, right? In the afternoon's light, she seemed to shimmer like the Orisha paintings in his sister's room, like specks atop the ocean. Even her dress flowed like the waters of the seas as she moved forward gracefully. It didn't even look like she took steps as she glided atop the grass as though she were on a pair of skates. The longer TJ stared at her outfit, the more at ease he felt, and he didn't come out of his trance until Elder Adeyemi finally spoke.
My old friend is right,
she phrased soothingly.
We cannot be without another young. How are you feeling? Tomori? TJ groaned, not sure why he gave her his full name. It just seemed like she commanded that kind of respect. Tomori Jomiloju. Or just, TJ. And I'm feeling fine. I'm just a little dizzy. Did you faint when you touched her? Yeah, I did. A few of the guests let out small gasps. TJ swallowed nervously, not meeting their eyes. Does that mean something? The elder drew down into a crouch like a queen of utter elegance. It means you have connected. Connected how? She smiled faintly. That remains to be seen. Looking at Mom askance, TJ was about to ask this elder Adeyemi about what all this promised child business was about. She seemed the type to know, when he heard shouting near Dayo's casket. The staff! A man shouted. It's glowing! Everyone turned their heads to the casket where Dayo's staff lay askew against it. Sure enough, the emerald at her staff's head pulsed brightly, just as TJ had seen it a week before. Heavens! A woman exclaimed from the crowd. Praise Arunmila! Turning his head back to the others, TJ saw that everyone was staring at Dayo's staff in awe. All except Mr. Bolawe and Elder Adeyemi. Both of their gazes rested on TJ and TJ alone. For a moment, the two traded glances between one another as the glow within the staff's crystal finally dwindled. And so it is seen, Mr. Bolawe said in answer to Elder Adeyemi's previous statement. Mom held her hand close to her mouth. Oh my, she really is with us. This is significant, Mr. Bolawe said to Mom. She could be trying to speak to us now. Tomori, do you hear a voice? What did you see when you were out? TJ trailed off. He couldn't concentrate with all the guests staring at him. It didn't help that everyone looked like they'd seen a ghost. Some of them were even looking over their shoulders and into the winds, not unlike TJ did the day he was in his sister's room. No, I didn't hear her. I didn't hear anything. Well, I did, but that was y'all's voices. I saw some figures and some smoke with all these colors, though. Does that mean anything? It could be that Mr. Young here may have activated the latent ashe in the staff in some way. Bolawe intoned mostly to Elder Adeyemi. Then he turned to Mom. May I ask why he's not at Ifa Academy this year? Well, we've tried. It's just... Mom stammered each of her answers. She always got like that when a diviner asked why TJ wasn't studying the Orisha or developing his ashe. It was never easy for her to say he was distinctly magic-free, except for his intermittent tingling. You see, he hasn't really... Dad stood forward, ceasing his wife's stuttering. Olufemi, he said as he pointed to the man's robes dampened with sweat. Let me get you some water. Mr. Bolawe broke his gaze with TJ, straightening his shirt before saying, No, it's okay. I'll go myself. Please, excuse me for just a moment. Mom wrapped her arms around TJ in a hug, pulling back to place his cheeks between her smooth palms. Are you really okay, baby? Do you feel like you might pass out again? Perhaps some water for Mr. Young as well, yes? Elder Adeyemi suggested gently. Mom slapped her forehead. What am I thinking? Of course! You must be lightheaded. I'll go get you some water too. She jogged away down the damp lawn, her ileke beads tapping together around her neck as she bounced. Mr. Young, Elder Adeyemi said. How's your knuckle? My knuckle? TJ questioned with a raised eyebrow. He looked down at his hand. The space between his index and middle finger were bleeding, a piece of his skin hanging from his hand. Oh, I slipped when I... Let me get that for you. She grabbed his hand and spoke some words lightly under her breath. Her hand felt like satin, despite its wrinkles and veins. Excuse me for being so ill-mannered. My name is Semisola Adeyemi, headmistress of Ifa Academy. I know. My mom told me.
This had been the first time he spoke to anyone from a magic school. It wasn't lost on TJ how much interest was laced in the old woman's voice either. A cool sensation breezed across TJ's knuckle. He glanced down and watched as the small cut between his knuckles started to mend itself. Mom had done the charm work on him and his siblings plenty of times before, but now he could almost see the energy surging between his fingers and Adeyemi's, could almost see how her words manifested the magical healing which weaved through his knuckle like a mist. It was almost like his basketball games at school, the same way he felt before making a pass to a teammate. Only now it seemed more distinct, less of a feeling and something more tangible and concrete. "Thank you, ma'am," TJ said as he examined his healed hand. He met Adeyemi's gaze, almost regretting it the moment he did. It looked like she was searching deep into him, which made TJ a bit uncomfortable. Mom returned, ambling along the lake's edge with a paper cup filled with water, which splashed over her hands with each of her skips. By the time she reached TJ, the cup was only a quarter full. "I'm so sorry, honey." She waved her hand over the cup, magically filling it with water once more. "Oshun mo bagdurasio, mo onju fumi, she unge fumi." Again, TJ would have sworn he saw something like a fog between the cup and Mom's hand. TJ grabbed the cup and drank. The cool water went down his throat, easy and smooth. He hadn't realized how thirsty he'd been, and in 2 large gulps he downed the whole cup. "Want some more?" Mom asked eagerly. TJ nodded. As his mother started to fill the cup again, TJ caught sight of a masked person with cream-colored robes at the back of the crowd holding a staff whose crystal was a lighting crimson. A woman nearby shrieked. "Keepers!" shouted another man in the crowd, and a blast erupted next to the tent, throwing dirt and grass into the air. Chapter 6. The Keepers. The funeral guests rushed past TJ, jostling and bumping against his shoulders roughly as they screamed and ran into each other in a panic. TJ tried to get up and follow everyone else, but ended up falling back on his knees. Parents grabbed their children and couples protected each other from the ground explosions that continued to blossom one after the other. "Ah!" TJ cried as someone's shoe came crashing down on his fingers. The foot's owner didn't stop to apologize as they made a beeline for the nearby lake, diving in and disappearing in what looked like a whirlpool that manifested in the water. More diviners followed suit as they rotated their arms in large circles and opened more whirlpools that they dived in and vanished into. A series of shouts brought TJ's attention back to the end of the tent, his pounding heart threatening to burst from his chest. Several figures dressed in white abada tunics stomped forward like an avalanche from the cemetery entrance, 50 yards away. Each wore a different Yoruba-made mask, some wooden, some iron, but all of them depicting the facade of someone or something with narrow eyes. They held staffs in their hands, flipping and turning them overhead and sidelong as flares of fire, sheets of ice, and mounds of earth shot out from their tips and whistled into the ground where they exploded. TJ covered his ears against the loud bangs. Those guests brave enough to remain echoed the spell phrase, "Opa wasimi." As they said the words, staff after staff manifested in each diviner's hands. From the tip of a keeper's staff, an inferno stream roared for the tent. But before it could meet the white tarp, an invisible wall of wind halted its forward momentum, and it blossomed like a plume upon impact. To his side, Mom lifted her own iron short staff over her head as she bellowed, "Get behind me!" to TJ. His chest, pulled by Mom's magical wind grip, tugged him bodily behind her. As TJ was pulled, he snatched a horror-stricken Tunde roughly around the collar. Dragging his brother with him, TJ dove for an overturned table where Dad lay. Blood leaked down from his lip into his goatee and onto his chin. He did his best to hold his expression firm and still, but his raised eyebrows, which disappeared into his head cap, betrayed the truth of his fear as blast after blast thumped against each of the defending diviners' windshields. The scale of the magic around was on a whole other level than what Tunde did to that reporter a week before. TJ's pounding heart knew no end among the chaos. Yet TJ braved a look over the table. What are the keepers doing here?
They'd always been in Nigeria, in news articles, some distant entity. Someone else's problem. Did they really chase Dayo's body all the way back to the States? And for what? Mom and Elder Adeyemi stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking every rush of fire and lightning strike they could. But there were too many keepers, and they had the advantage of surprise. Where were they coming from? TJ thought. They couldn't have all snuck in. None of the other diviners had time to regroup in a proper defense. They were spread out too wide and too thin. If they could just band together, maybe they'd have a fighting chance. A thundering bass pounded in TJ's ears, and a familiar tingle came to his fingers. Again, his mind flashed back to last week's basketball game. But that was a different thing entirely. There, in a pickup game, the worst that could happen was TJ taking a hard foul. Here, in the middle of a diviner duel, the cost was his life. TJ glanced behind him. His sister's casket was still okay, untouched by the carnage all around, with the lake serving as a natural defense behind them. TJ steeled some courage in the pit of his stomach as he tracked Mom's every movement. He'd never seen her fight before. The most impressive thing he'd ever witnessed her do before that day was water plants or fill their glasses at dinner. Now he understood why the elders always said she was the greatest water sorceress of her time, a true daughter of Yemoja. The lake vibrated to the will of her iron staff, where she flung out 10-foot waves of water from it with deceptive ease as she warded the attackers off. It took a pair of keepers teaming up with joint spells of fire plumes to halt her assault. It took a third to push her back. Even 20 yards away, the furious breath of heat licked at TJ's skin. As Mom backstepped, Elder Adeyemi pushed forward, her staff work even more impressive as she deflected the streaks of fire. But she didn't just fling the fire back the same way they came. Instead, splitting the flames and throwing them back like red-orange birds that countered against the attackers 3 and 4 at a time. Despite both of their awesome skills, they could not defend the tent alone, as a streak of flame passed between them and straight toward TJ and his family. Clenching his body tightly, TJ didn't have time to throw his hands in front of his face or twist out of the way as he watched the ball of flame rage forward. But at the last moment, it seemed to curve, careening harmlessly into a rock near the lake's edge. From behind Dayo's casket, Mr. Bolawe vaulted into the air with his own staff in hand, twirling it around like a baton. "Diviners, on me!" he bellowed. "Form up around Adeyemi. Make a barrier." The fighting diviners followed his commands. They hopped over chairs and tables and clustered closer together as the keepers surrounded the tent in a semicircle. Though Mr. Bolawe took a leading role, he was not the best diviner present. His water spouts were no bigger than a kiddie fountain, and the few lightning bolts he cast were as thin as linguine. Mom doled out more protective wind charms, her staff's crystal lighting up and swallowing every attack in her reach, while Bolawe's waned like a dying light. It seemed the more powerful the magic, the more powerful the light. Elder Adeyemi was working the impossible, manipulating blades of grass into sharp spears and daggers as she dodged and rolled with agility belonging to a college athlete, not an elderly woman. The others were holding their own too, yet Mr. Bolawe was just a step slower, his reflexes just a touch less astute. The man reminded TJ of himself. Bolawe was like an orchestrator, always in the right place at the right time, to support one diviner or another, ordering a pair to fill a gap or another trio to push forward. But the keepers flanked wide at the sides. Bolawe couldn't lead all by himself. Fighting back his fear, TJ clutched at the edge of his table. He couldn't just stand there letting everyone else fight. He didn't know any spells or hexes, but maybe with Mr. Bolawe leading the charge, he could do something. Anything. Even if it was small, just like Bolawe's tiny spells. But each thump that came against magical walls locked TJ's feet in place. For a moment, he toiled between fight and freeze. He fought against the voice telling him to stay put and the other one who told him not to be a wimp. The second voice won out, beating heart and mounting fear be damned. Turning, TJ looked for Dayo's staff. He spotted it on the ground. It had fallen over next to the peaches off the side of the casket.
The crystal at its head glowed crimson instead of emerald. TJ reached out desperately for the staff, clambering toward it. When he touched the shaft, the crystal's hue cooled to orange, then settled back into a dirty emerald, almost brown-looking. "What are you doing?" his brother asked, ducking behind a folded chair. "Fighting instead of hiding," TJ answered as he gripped the staff, rolled from under the table, and swung the mahogany wood around to the action. Mr. Balawe glanced over his shoulder toward TJ and the staff, then turned to the others to shout, "Forward! Hit them where it hurts!" TJ's drive to help was for nothing, it seemed. Under Mr. Balawe's command, the tides turned in the funeral guest's favor. It didn't make sense, though. A moment ago, the keepers were surrounding them, and now, for some reason, they backed off. One after the other, the keepers covered each other's retreat as they too backpedaled toward the cemetery entrance, disappearing into holes in the ground, little whirlpools of dirt like the guest who escaped into the lake. A glint of light against one of the keeper's beads caught TJ's eyes, a blur of red, pink, and burgundy. Where had he seen that before? His gaze followed the keeper, whose limp kept them further back from the others, as they finally made it to the earth portal in the ground, disappearing into its muddy depths. In the end, there were no bodies or injuries as TJ would have expected, funeral guests and keepers alike. The only impressions of a fight came by way of the overturned chairs and a corner of the tent kindling with embers. "They already took my daughter from me. What more do those Oloshi want?" Mom roared, rifling into a tirade. Her red face looked wild. TJ had never seen her so angry before. When she finally ran out of curses to say in Yoruba, she started swearing in English. Dad had to lock her in a hug to stop her from lashing out. So that's what a cardiac arrest meant. It wasn't code for a natural death. It was code for murder. TJ's stomach threatened to come up, and he couldn't blame Mom one bit. He wanted to blow up too. Felt his breathing growing harsh in his chest. Whoever these keepers were had defiled Dayo's funeral. And for what? A wooden creak came at his side, and TJ saw that his hand was white-knuckled around his sister's staff. Then his gaze traveled along the disturbed earth in between the tombstones. He hoped one of the keepers got hit in the leg or got left behind, too weak to conjure an earth portal. One of them would pay for what they did. One of them would explain why they did it all. But there was no one there. So, slowly he released his grip, ignoring the pain. "I don't understand. Their attack made no sense," Elder Adeyemi gritted as she slammed the bottom of her staff before her. It stood upright of its own accord. "The keepers are brutal, but they don't provoke without reason." "There were a lot of important people here today," Mr. Bolawe suggested, leaning on the edge of the tent's post to catch his breath. "You least of all, Simi." TJ couldn't help agreeing with Elder Adeyemi as adrenaline leaked from his fingertips, his sister's staff still creaking in his hand. He knew very little about the keepers, but one thing he picked up from his little research over the week about keeper attacks was that they never leave survivors. Elder Adeyemi paced with a finger to her brow. "They've never attacked while you were present, Elder," Mr. Bolawe reminded her. "And perhaps they changed their policy." Adeyemi didn't have a response to that, still jabbing at her forehead. "Something doesn't feel right about it all. At the very least, they make a big show about why they're attacking. They always have their demands." "TJ, what are you doing with that?" Mom's voice rang in his ear. TJ gulped, looking down at his sister's staff. I told you to stay behind me." She raced over to TJ with heated eyes. "I know, but..." Mr. Balawe took a step between TJ and his mother. "It's okay, Mrs. Young. The kid just wanted to help. No one got hurt, thankfully." Mom took a deep breath, her jaw grinding. Her face went through a bizarre metamorphosis, changing from a fierce expression of slanted eyebrows and pursed lips
to wide eyes of sadness, then to tears as she turned to Dayo's casket. Fortunately, the casket and display had stayed intact, except for a few of Dayo's personal effects, like her staff, which had fallen over before TJ grabbed it. At least those damn keepers didn't do anything to her body. Mom slumped over to the coffin and dropped her head into Dayo's chest. Senseless Oloshi. They already won, she cried. Why can't they just leave us be? TJ's throat went dry. For a moment he thought he'd get a beating, but now he only felt shame for putting himself in danger. Mom had already lost one child. She didn't need to lose another. And everything was coming to light now. Everything about his sister and the keepers and what she was doing. Dayo would have never stood down from them. She was too stubborn and too brave to. He remembered what the reporter had said to Tunde. Is it true Dayo Young was fighting against the... TJ didn't hear the rest. But now he knew what that statement was supposed to be. Is it true Dayo Young was fighting against the keepers? Why hadn't he known about any of this stuff? He couldn't bring himself to ask these questions out loud, of course. Not then. Not when Mom was like this. It was bad enough that her daughter, his own sister, was gone. It was all the worse that the keepers came to ruin everything. As Elder Adeyemi had said, they accomplished nothing but pissing off a family. Looking at Mr. Bolawe, who murmured to Elder Adeyemi, TJ couldn't help thinking they knew something he didn't. He'd never forget how they looked at him after coming back from his faint. TJ couldn't deny what he sensed afterward, how he felt at that moment. Deep down, something within him had changed. Chapter 7. Manifestation. The United Council of Magical Peoples had a tough time covering up the attack at Dayo's funeral. Luckily, many of the guests who attended the funeral were already familiar with the diviner community, and the attack was within the confines of the gated cemetery, which had enchanted protections. Mom said there were only a handful of civilians driving by who noticed large flashes above the walls, but the UCMP was able to write it off as a fireworks show gone wrong. When one of the local neighborhood watch women complained that fireworks should have never been set off within the cemetery and that she'd make an official complaint to the city of Inglewood, the council members assured everything would be taken care of. Mom told TJ later they had people in the city council who'd make sure the woman never got a proper response to her complaints. Later that same day, TJ and Tunde watched the Divination Today story on the news site's live stream, which diviners and their households could only access. It seemed there was a mixed bag of reactions from the counselors on what happened and what they would do. One of the American counselors, a woman from New Orleans, with wild hair, skull-like face paint, and a boa around her neck, said the attack had been the first major one on American soil in over a decade, and that their protocols were now a touch outdated. Another, a man TJ thought could be related to the real Thor with his braided beard and blonde hair, said his nation would do all they could to help suppress the keeper threat from returning. And a Hindi counselor woman with more piercings than TJ could count said her government would watch their seas closely for any unauthorized transport and intervene if there was. Over the next week, as the dust settled around the keeper attack and Dayo's funeral, TJ was disappointed to find that he was just the same as before. The tingle he felt during the funeral never returned, and he remained positively magicless. Ordinary. Vanilla. Several times during the week, he visited the family's ancestral altar to use Dayo's staff, which now hung alongside the other family staffs. Yet each time he gripped the wooden shaft, the only sensation that brushed against his palm was smooth mahogany, not the power of Ashe. Each night he went back and tried a new grip or spoke a different prayer, only to find the same result. Absolutely nothing. Since the funeral, the staff's crystal never glowed again, red or green. For hours at a time, he had stared at the face carved into the staff. He thought perhaps ogling at it long enough might unlock some sort of latent magic. It didn't. All it did was give him an eyesore.
It took another week for TJ to give up the notion that he was changed or special. Logic would have it that everything he felt was in his head, and he merely wanted to feel different. Despite his less than encouraging results with magic, he still investigated the keepers as much as he could. At first, he was glued to the Divination Today streams, but all their coverage of the keepers was everything he already knew about them. They were a radical group in southwest Nigeria who were in pursuit of bringing back the full power of the long-lost Orishas, no matter how many lives it would cost to do so. When he got tired of hearing the same thing over and over, he went to Mom to ask her about them and Dayo's relation to them. But each time he asked her a question, she responded with an, "It's very complicated," or, "You wouldn't understand. I'll tell you when you're older." So then he texted Adiola to see what she would tell him. TJ, are you okay? TJ, were you at the service? 3 dots popped up and bounced on his screen. Adiola, I'm fine. I didn't stay, but heard about what happened on DT. Are you guys all right? TJ, they killed Dayo. TJ, the keepers killed her. TJ, do you know about that? Another 3 dots did their dance on screen. Adiola, how's your mother doing? TJ, did you see what I just sent? This time a long stream of 3 dots popped up, then went away for a while, popped up again, went away for a while, then showed up again. Adiola, it's okay, I'll call her. So TJ shifted to Google, which quickly turned out to have nothing about any magical community, diviner or otherwise. The best he could find were articles and videos detailing the mythology of the Orishas, as though they weren't real. But there was nothing about a group of radical magical people in West Africa. When he did a specific search for the story about the attack at Inglewood Cemetery, his results showed up with petty crime nearby, but nothing about an attack, not even the cover story of fireworks. You're never going to find anything like that, his brother told him one morning. TJ jumped with a start. His little brother always had a way of sneaking up on him, especially when he didn't want him to. TJ thought of closing his laptop, but it was too late. Tunde already knew what he was up to. And you know a better way? TJ asked with a furrowed brow. Tunde shrugged sheepishly. The UCMP stay keeping their stuff hidden online. Sometimes you'll find something that pops up for a few minutes, maybe an hour at most, but it'll be gone right after. Though the boy was only 10, he was smarter than half the tech heads working in Silicon Valley. During his very short childhood, he had already generated thousands of followers on social media, where he produced and taught others how to code in total anonymity. Not even their parents knew he went by the moniker Nolage online. The only reason TJ knew was because Tunde wanted to gloat last summer. Let me guess, TJ started. You're not going to tell me how to look up what I need without something in return? Yep, he said quickly. Unless you tell me what you're looking for. TJ considered it for a moment, but he wasn't sure what he'd find or where the information would lead him. Plus, he didn't want to put his brother in danger. And even beyond that, Tunde was terrible at keeping other people's secrets, especially TJ's. That's cold. Can't you just be a good brother for once? TJ decided to ask. Tunde ignored him. What do you have to offer up? TJ bit down on his cheek. It was difficult to barter anything of value with Tunde. He had almost anything and everything he wanted, and whatever it was he didn't have, he always figured out a way to get it. What about chores? TJ asked hesitantly. It was the only thing he could possibly offer his brother. Tunde rubbed his hands together, his eyes looking to the ceiling in exaggerated thought. It was clear he knew this was where the conversation would lead. Dad was a stickler for a clean house, a carryover from his brief time in the military, and the mid-month deep clean was approaching rapidly. We're training you to be good husbands when you grow up, Dad had always said. The cleanup wasn't just making beds and putting towels away. It included clearing the cobwebs under the house, dusting every single surface in the kitchen, even mending the fences. And it didn't help that each month a new item in the house seemed to break down. Worst of all, with Mom teaching weekends and nights and their father always away at some sports camp, much of the work was dumped on the boys. TJ thought back on the jammed back door he'd likely have to fix himself. That alone would probably take a whole day to fix. I'd be open to you taking over mopping duties, Tunde finally decided. TJ relaxed a little. That was fair and easy enough, but Tunde wasn't finished. And the dining room chandelier. TJ sucked his teeth. Nah, that's not fair. I did it last month. The chandelier wasn't difficult to clean, strictly speaking, but it was certainly the most tedious. Their parents always told the boys to take the chandelier down and take it apart piece by piece to dust and clean each little hanging crystal. The entire task took, at best, 3 hours from disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly. Tunde smiled. That's the offer, bro. Take it or leave it. Most times, TJ would have flat out denied his brother's request, spit out some foul language, and slammed the bedroom door in his face. Yet the blinking cursor on his screen and the bold 0 results flashing atop the search engine halted all his natural brotherly reactions. So instead, he just grunted. Ugh, fine. I'll do the stupid chandelier. Bet, Tunde leered. I figured you would. TJ suppressed the irritation surfacing up his chest. What are you doing here anyway? Oh, right, Tunde snapped his fingers. Mom wants you downstairs. Dude, you took all that time to tell me? TJ slammed his laptop shut, rushed past his brother, making sure to shove him in the shoulder, and hustled downstairs to where Mom tended to the ancestral altar in the living room with a bottle of polish in her hand. Mom whipped her head up as TJ slid into a stop, his heel digging into the shag carpet for resistance. She chuckled. What took you so long, honey? Sorry, it was... TJ was going to say it was Tunde's fault, but thought better of it. He still needed information out of him. No need to ruffle feathers. I had to use the bathroom first. Well, you're here now. She pointed to the altar. I just got done cleaning the table. Could you help me get all these things put back where they should go? Why didn't you get Tunde to do it? TJ whined. Because I asked you, Tomori Jomiloju. Mom didn't even need to look at TJ. Her fierce voice was enough. TJ knew all too well that talkback was out of the equation on this one. Holding back a sigh, he dipped to his knees and grabbed the first few items. Pictures of TJ's great-grandmother along with incense sticks. As he set the pictures where they belonged at the edge of the table, Mom spoke again. I know you've had a lot of questions over the past week or so. She stared at the frame in her hand. A picture of Dio, one TJ knew well because of the fake smile she gave the camera. Mom had forced a photo out of her before her first day at IFA Academy. You know I love you, right, son? TJ nodded and gulped. Was Mom really about to tell him what he wanted to know? He wouldn't even need to do Tunde's chores if she did. I've been too short with you, and that's not fair. I haven't explained myself correctly. She finally set Dio's picture next to the others. The reason I haven't told you about your sister and everything else going on in Nigeria is that I didn't want to worry you. Do you understand? TJ nodded again as he moved to the unscented candles next. He did his best to keep his expression flat as he set down 2 green crystals and a clear one on the table. I don't think it matters much now, she sighed. If your ashe was going to show itself, it would have happened already. She snapped her fingers thrice above each candle. After a short moment, each of them birthed tiny flames that appeared to dance. Again, TJ saw a wisp of a fog before each flame came to life. When Ife Dayo first attended IFA, like all other students, the oracles put her through a test. Mom stopped herself for a moment, a finger at her lips. The promised child? TJ finished for her. Yes, she said. Her eyes looked distant, and the flames from the candles reflected majestically in her eyes. That's when all that promised child business started up. What does that mean? TJ encased the lit candles in glass, lifting the cylinder from the floor and placing it on the center of the table. It's complicated. She swallowed hard. Her eyebrows knitted together, a tension building in her forehead. It's okay, Mom. Take your time. She sighed and stood before a wide and empty jug, like she always did, she initiated her favorite water ritual, beginning with the first line. Aki bosinu omitang kamasafuno tutu. Unlike the cup at the funeral, this jug took longer to fill. Fresh water materialized from the bottom of the jug and rose high at a snail's pace. Again, to TJ, that odd fog blossomed before the water appeared in reality. Mom turned to speak. You see, your sister. The kitchen telephone rang. Give me a second, honey. She shuffled to the kitchen, leaving TJ by himself with the altar. It only took a few minutes for him to finish organizing it as his mind raced. He couldn't imagine what had happened with his sister and those oracles, but he knew enough about legends to know she must have been special, powerful. That explained why she was so good at everything. Perhaps some Orisha had bestowed special magic for her to use. Whatever she had, it must have scared the keepers enough to have her killed. TJ stared at the water half filled in the jug. Before she was pulled away, Mom had only completed half the spell, which had ended the moment she went to answer the phone. TJ tried to recall the rest of the words. Mom used the phrase almost every day. He just wasn't sure if he'd get the enunciations right. TJ took a moment to recite what he thought was correct in his head before he finally said out loud in Yoruba, Osun mogbadurasio, mo ungefumi, she ongefumi. As he spoke, a familiar tingle came to his fingertips. Slowly, the water rippled, then bubbled like a pot set to fire. A faint glow fluttered atop each bubble as they burst open. The same prism fog TJ saw when he played basketball. The same radiance he saw just before a teammate scored. A moment later, and his gut went empty. To his utter surprise, the water within the jug rose again. Not as quickly as it did with Mom, but sure enough, it lifted past the jug's midpoint and crawled to the brim. A clinking sound echoed through the hallway, followed by the panting breaths of Simba. In an instant, the dog was at TJ's heels, jumping onto his knees and barking playfully. TJ had never seen the old dog vault so high before. I'm on the phone, Mom hollered. Can you get him to stop yapping, please? Quiet, Simba, quiet. TJ tried to hold him down, but the dog was beside himself, turning around in circles and jumping without pause. Tomori, what did I tell you? I'm trying. He won't stop. Mom asked whoever she was on the phone with if they could excuse her. Then she set the phone on the kitchen counter and stomped over to TJ. Simba, she snapped her fingers. Relax. Simba, who also knew the rage of Mom too well, stopped barking, though his tail wagged uncontrollably and his tongue hung from the side of his mouth. Mom looked to the self-filling water, which had now nearly spilled over the top. Itelohum, she uttered, and the water stopped rising, and with it the glow. Was TJ the only one who could see it? I would have sworn I didn't finish that spell. She glanced at TJ, who stood still, his mouth agape. Tomori jomiloju? You didn't. TJ found all his words were caught at the back of his throat as his gaze flitted between Mom, Simba, and the jug. And again, just like before in his sister's room a few weeks back, something cool brushed against his neck. Goosebumps stuck out against TJ's arms. Mom grabbed TJ's shoulders and stared at him straight on. Tomori, tell me, did you finish that spell? Slowly, very slowly, TJ nodded. He still didn't believe he did it himself. But now, with Mom saying the words out loud, he let himself believe it was actually him who did it, and not just a carryover from what Mom had done. Mom clapped her hands to her mouth and her eyes misted over. Turning on her heel, she shouted down the hallway. Jelen! Get me my water bowl from the closet! She twisted again to TJ. Her expression had never appeared more proud before. We need to call Priest Glover! Chapter 8, A Will and a Way. It took the better part of the afternoon, but Mom finally convinced Priest Glover to visit their home the next day. Despite that, Dad was less keen about TJ potentially going off to Ifa Academy as Dio did. Seriously? The school responsible for our daughter's death? Now you want to send our boy? He asked Mom as they all sat in the living room awaiting Priest Glover. Although TJ sat between them on their lumpy sofa, they spoke about him like he wasn't there. The academy isn't responsible. She had already graduated before all that, Mom justified as she got up and adjusted one of Dio's trophies hanging over the fireplace, which they never used. And there's no safer place in Nigeria than Ifa Academy in New Ile Ife? Dad crossed his enormous arms, his frown making his goatee look like it was collapsing. The Orishas have chosen him for a reason, Mom added. Didn't you say he only finished half a ritual, or spell, or whatnot? The lines on Mom's forehead scrunched together. She must have been thinking the same thing TJ had been in that moment. Ever since the ritual with the jug, TJ hadn't managed to manifest any other forms of magic. He was still crap with cowrie divinations, and all the rudimentary blood magic rituals his mother taught him manifested a whole lot of nothing. In the back of his mind, he had wondered if the magic had only worked because of some residual ashe left over from Mom. But he kept reminding himself that it was him who completed it. He felt it. He saw it. That school was expensive enough when Dio went, Dad continued in a grunt. Magic schools ain't in the budget these days, you know? Oh, Jalen. I can take on extra hours at this school. We'd find a way. Dad grumbled to himself and rubbed the back of his head vigorously. He did that when he had more to say but didn't feel like arguing. Instead of a rebuttal, he got up as well and paced the room in rhythm with his head rubs. A moment of gratification at seeing Dad sweat made TJ feel guilty, until he remembered his father's attitude yesterday. A moment he was still trying to understand. After Priest Glover had agreed to see TJ, Mom was about to tell TJ more about Dio when his dad came home. Overhearing them, Dad stepped in right away, shutting it down and saying that the boy's too young to know about all that. TJ didn't get it. In fact, he hated it. If his non-magical father could know, why couldn't he? What was the big deal? Frustration curled through his chest, but instead of pressing the issue, TJ turned his mind to the coming meeting. He had enough to worry about, especially when his examination would be under the observation of Priest Glover once again. TJ knew his test would be under massive scrutiny. Had this been his first test, that might not have been the case. But this would be his third. His first was well before he could remember, which occurred 7 days after his birth. Obviously, he had failed that one, but he had no recollection, so it didn't wound his pride or anything like that. When TJ was a toddler, the priest did a simple examination to determine which Orisha aligned with him the most. All the tests came back with a big 0. No mystical guardian for him, which apparently was an implausibility in and of itself. Even non-magical people had some association with Orishas like Shango or Yemoja. As far as Priest Glover could tell, TJ was nothing more than an ordinary boy, completely unmagical. But that wasn't cause for concern, at least not then. Many young diviners didn't manifest their powers until later in childhood. So each week, Mom and Dio did their best to teach TJ what they knew, and he disappointed them time and time again, year after year. His second, third, and fourth birthdays, the ones when diviners were most likely to manifest, came and went without event. When it was time for TJ to attend kindergarten for the first time, the same year Dio went off to Ifa Academy, Mom thought he'd predicted his acceptance to the Hughes Academy of Gifted Youths when TJ accidentally knocked over her set of cowries in the alignment of Educational Success in the West. So she made him take a mail-in test for the less prestigious American school. But the following week, they got the call that TJ's EAD, early Ashe detection, were too low. Well, that was a lie. They were actually non-existent. Though Mom did her best to nurture TJ's development, it wasn't a surprise 6 years later, the year before TJ could start at any of the diviner schools, including Ifa Academy, when he was officially rejected. The decision devastated Mom, though she never showed it in front of him. But he could always tell by the way she said Ifa in his presence. like it was a secret he wasn't allowed to hear. TJ always figured it was her way of protecting his feelings. But ever since he completed that water spell, his mother said Ifa with the same warm energy she did before his 11th birthday. Though his demonstration of magic was less than impressive, it was also the only demonstration to prove he might have some ashe in him after all. Still, his little trick with the water didn't entertain confidence within his gut, which at the moment had felt empty despite Dad feeding him a breakfast of champions that included a mountain of potatoes, a fillet of salmon, a whole avocado, and a super green mystery shake to wash it all down. Well, if you're gonna take the test, you better do 'em right, Dad had said as TJ did his best to keep down what he figured was a ginger afterkick from the shake. TJ gazed up and around the living room filled with the awards and certificates Dio couldn't fit in her own room. The living room was a bit drab, filled with faded grays and browns, but the glistening trophies brightened it with shimmers of silver and gold. Dio hardly ever earned bronze. TJ always figured Mom put them up to inspire him and Tunde, but they only ever served to intimidate him. How could he ever match someone like her? A knock at the front door made TJ jump. Dad didn't move at all. Mom sprung up and nearly skipped to the front door to greet Priest Glover and, to TJ's surprise, a second visitor. "Oh, Elder Adeyemi!" Mom exclaimed. "I'm sorry, we weren't expecting you." TJ could only see Mom's back dipping low in a formal Yoruba curtsy. TJ tried to hide his shock as he stole a glance at his father. Dad's squared jaw and sharp brow didn't change at all. TJ couldn't blame him. He didn't understand who Simisola Adeyemi was. And up to a little while ago, TJ hadn't known she was one of the most celebrated diviners in the world. She came up a bunch of times in his searches for Dio and the Keepers after his brother helped him out, though. What is she doing here? TJ thought as his heart decided to start a drumline in his chest. It was bad enough that Priest Glover was there to deny him for probably the third time. But in the headmistress's presence on top of it all, it seemed excessive. "Please, come inside. You must be hot." Mom waved a hand into her home, revealing Priest Glover's chunky, broad face and Elder Adeyemi's long, slender one. Like before, Adeyemi wore an outfit of deep blue sprinkled with dots of white. It looked almost like a galaxy shifted within her clothes. With her usual glide, she slid into the house and brightened the living room. The gilded trophies and awards seemed to reach out to her with small, bright eyes. She bowed her head slightly, directing her words to Dad. "Good afternoon, Mr. Young." She turned to smile to TJ. "And to you, Mr. Young?" Priest Glover stomped in after her. He cleared his nose loudly and grunted as a form of salutation. Dad snorted his own greeting and TJ let out a meek hello as Mom served their guests glasses of zobo, a refreshing red Nigerian hibiscus juice, perfect for a hot day. "Summer's starting with some real heat this year, isn't it?" Mom asked as she directed Glover and Adeyemi to a pair of lumpy sofa chairs that had been in the family, TJ thought, since the Civil War. Elder Adeyemi responded with a comment about similar weather in Lagos, and the adults continued with their small talk for a few moments. Priest Glover seemed less than enthused, his arms crossed around his chest like he was restraining himself in his own invisible straitjacket. After a few moments, he cleared his throat gruffly. "Headmistress Adeyemi has very limited time with us today. Shall we begin with the..." Priest Glover's tone turned nasty. Prospect? Right." Elder Adeyemi set down the glass of her half-drunk zobo. "I am most intrigued to start today's session. Not that there's anything wrong with it, Headmistress," Mom started, her voice deferential. "But may I ask why you've come with Priest Glover today?" TJ steadied his gaze on the elder, anticipating her response. "It's very uncommon for the academy to accept a new student so late," she began. "If TJ is accepted today,
There will be a lot to consider. He would have already missed 2 years of instruction, and as you may know, the 3rd year at IFA is an evaluation year. Were he accepted, he'd have to be held back. Unless the boy can pass all the preliminary tests. Priest Glover huffed as though he were suppressing a laugh. TJ remembered Dio saying something about the 3rd year test. She had been so stressed then, staying up late even when she was on winter vacation. It was bad enough that Priest Glover seemed keen to fail TJ before their examination began. Now it was near impossible to impress them enough to believe that 1, TJ had enough ashe to attend the school, and 2, that he was astute enough to catch up on 2 years of missed training. I'm only here to observe, Adeyemi continued. When all the preliminaries are complete, both Babalawo Glover and I will decide if TJ is ready under these special circumstances. Great, Mom said. Do we start now? Priest Glover sat forward, his backside conducting a chorus of creaks. Yes, but we will have to ask both parents to leave. Is that really necessary? Mom questioned Elder Adeyemi. Both times before they allowed me to stay. True. Adeyemi's voice came as gentle as a breeze. But considering the unique circumstances we found ourselves in, we think it's best to test the boy alone, without any distractions. TJ shifted uncomfortably between his parents. When Mom sat forward, TJ didn't like how he could no longer feel her arm pressed against his. Mom must have been thinking the same thing because she said, I don't see how my being here for my son would change anything. He won't have his mother with him at Ifa, after all, Priest Glover added coldly. Best he gets used to such a thing, if he? Glover waved his hand, clearly finding even the possibility of TJ succeeding being ridiculous enough to even speak aloud. If he does find a place at the academy. TJ didn't like the way the man's lips curled at their edges or how his wide nostrils flared like a giant pig's. I'm sure there's something we could do while we wait. Dad sat and clapped his hands together. He seemed pleased he didn't have to sit through what would likely be a grueling session. TJ's shoulders slumped with the thought he'd fail again. Another pin of disappointment, and in a room full of Dio's achievements to top it off. I can assure you everything will be fine, Mrs. Young. Elder Adeyemi placated Mom with a sensitive and warm expression. TJ couldn't help noticing there always seemed to be a deep sympathy in her words. Like she had seen a lot of stuff in life. Like she could feel what others did at every moment. To be honest, Mrs. Young, Priest Glover said, we need to be sure your son's expression of ashe is his own. Mom leaned back on the sofa, utterly sinking into it. TJ didn't look at her face, but he was sure she was fixing the priest with a brutal stare. I know you're not thinking I'm trying to pull something over on you, on Elder Simisola Adeyemi, of all diviners? Priest Glover shook his head. Of course not, Mrs. Young. Then what are you insinuating? Mom's voice was dark. Elder Adeyemi lifted her hands gracefully. As her arms rose, the stars on her dress shifted like a meteor shower in the night. We do not mean ill by our request. We merely need to replicate the scenarios Mr. Young will experience in the academy. Scenarios that do not involve a parent present. Dad, who had already stood up, looked between the room of diviners nervously. He blew large shoots of air through his cheeks, making them look like skin-colored balloons. Rubbing the back of his head again, he turned to Mom. Let them do their tests like they want to, honey. Mom didn't look at him at all, instead glaring at Priest Glover. Like TJ, she seemed to know it was he who suggested a solo examination. It didn't help that now he looked to be accusing her of some sort of fraudulent behavior. Okay then, she finally said, breaking the mounting tension in the room. As the head mistress wants it. She shot up from her seat and marched out of the room. Each step she took upstairs sounded like an earthquake rumbling through the whole of the old house.
Dad followed after her sheepishly as he gave the guests brief apologies. A few moments after that, TJ, Priest Glover, and Elder Adeyemi sat in silence. Well, not exact silence. TJ thought it was more like him sitting quietly, while the two diviners fixed him with discomforting stares, looking him up and down like some show dog before a contest, as they mumbled to each other in Yoruba he didn't quite understand. So, TJ started, do I start or do you... I do not sense any Orisha within him, Priest Glover finally said, ignoring him. He never looked at Elder Adeyemi as he spoke, but straight at TJ without breaking eye contact. Adeyemi stroked the bottom of her chin. Though she definitely would have classified as a senior citizen, her skin did not betray her age. The only way TJ knew she was an elder was by the way she moved, the way she spoke with that assured sense of wisdom. I wouldn't be so sure of that assessment, she said. True, there is no direct correlation to pick up on, but there is something hidden just under the veil. Don't you sense it? Glover inhaled deeply and exhaled emphatically. I'll admit, he's reading differently from the other times I've judged him. But it means little. This isn't unheard of, Adeyemi added. After all, we do not finalize Orisha alignment until the end of the 3rd year. TJ would have thought they had forgotten he was there with how they were talking at him, not with him. Do I get any say in this? He asked with a little irritation. When he spoke, both of the diviners' trance-like gazes seemed to break. Yes, I suppose you do. Elder Adeyemi interlaced her fingers into her lap. You are familiar with the Orishas, yes? TJ wasn't sure what Adeyemi meant by the question. He knew this was a test, though, and with such tests, there was often a double meaning to the words. Was the headmistress asking if TJ knew all the names? Did she mean if he knew all their spirits? Did she mean if TJ communed with them during his daily rituals? A simple yes was the safest answer TJ could think to give, but then he thought back on the funeral and his sister. He definitely felt something with her. Was that the answer the headmistress was looking for? Probably not. Dio wasn't an Orisha, just a diviner. Elder Adeyemi continued to stare with those deep, brilliant eyes of hers. What answer would she want to hear, TJ wondered. Before TJ could muster a response to their first question, Adeyemi hummed and nodded. I don't think we'll determine anything with his alignment. Let's move on to our follow-up evaluations. Wait, TJ said. So this whole sitting thing was a test? I wasn't doing anything. Don't I have to concentrate or something like that? That's how I did it yesterday. But again, the elders ignored his words and continued to watch him. TJ wondered if this was normal. What was the point of not answering him? A few moments later, Elder Adeyemi downed the rest of her Zobo drink and rested the empty cup on the table. Please, she gestured to the glass, fill this cup with water. This was the moment TJ had been dreading. He couldn't get the damn spell to work without Mom being around, and seeing as they forced her to retreat to her room, there was nothing for him to latch onto. Your mother tells us you can summon drinking water, Priest Glover said. Is this true? TJ nodded silently. He knew what was supposed to come next, but he couldn't do it. If life were fair, if life were simple, he'd start reciting the spell word for word with no mistakes and fill the cup with water. Adeyemi would drink it and say, This tastes wonderful. Shake his hand and officially invite him to Ifa Academy, where he would go on to train like his sister had, maybe even take on her role as the hero of Nigeria. But life was never so easy. For the next painstaking minutes, TJ sat mumbling the water spell without as much as producing a droplet. You see? Priest Glover sucked his teeth.
The boy cannot be accepted. Elder Adeyemi sighed. Manifesting drinking water is complicated magic. We couldn't expect Mr. Young to replicate what must have been a fluke. TJ gritted his teeth. It wasn't a fluke. He had done it before. He just didn't know how. But he did. Hold on. Give me a second. TJ lifted his hands to halt them from making any hasty decisions. Sometimes I get this feeling in my fingers. A little tingle. TJ clapped his hands together and rubbed them, aiming for that familiar sensation. But all he managed to do was heat his hands like it was a cold day. Priest Glover rolled his bored eyes to Adeyemi. For whatever reason, though, Elder Adeyemi kept testing TJ no matter how many times he failed. First, with his skills in alchemy, where he was directed to brew a simple healing balm for chapped lips. Then on his skill to predict the next day's weather. Yet all he could see in the spread of cowries along a divination board was just that, a cluster of sea snail armor atop a wooden circle. Why don't I just use my cell phone to predict the weather? TJ asked the diviners, his frustration getting the better of him. Priest Glover responded by saying that the clouded scientist couldn't predict the weather if their lives depended on it. He said that their educated guesses were more fickle than their stock market. TJ noticed Glover enjoyed saying clouded a lot in a very rude way when referring to non-magical people. It's a simple prediction, Mr. Young. Glover spat over TJ's shoulder. His breath smelled like hot garbage. First-year students in junior secondary school can do this in their sleep. Despite another failure to produce magic, Elder Adeyemi continued her tests. Frustration settled in TJ's tight grip as he punched the cowries when the diviners weren't looking. Why did they keep testing him over and over? It was obvious they were right. TJ was just a fluke, like they said. Okay, you've proven your point, TJ said as he followed the diviners to the backyard. I suck. I can't do any of this magic stuff. Why don't you just call my mom back down and tell her I wasted your time? Priest Glover looked half ready to turn on his heel and oblige, yet it was Elder Adeyemi who stood in front of him. Then she knelt down to TJ. With a gentle smile, she placed a hand on TJ's cheek. Young man, all day I have put you through many trials. Why do you think that is? So that Priest Glover can make fun of me with his domino buddies on Friday nights? TJ sniped. It surprised him to hear a legit chuckle from the priest. TJ was about to give him a scowl when Elder Adeyemi cuffed his chin and locked it in place, forcing him to look at her straight on. You do that a lot, don't you? Adeyemi asked. What? Cover your insecurities with humor. Ifedayo did it too in her first year. A shiver careened through TJ's spine at the sound of his sister's name. Maybe it was the way the elder said it. Her Nigerian accent suited Dayo's name perfectly. Go figure. But it was more than just the intonation. It was like something inside him had jump-started. Did you ever talk to her? TJ asked. At the school, I mean. Adeyemi's eyes shifted slightly. For once they looked human, brown instead of that endless deep. As well as I did any other student, she said, looking down and back up to TJ. And more. Priest Glover tapped his foot impatiently. Headmistress, I think we should continue. I believe in you, Tomori Jomiloju. She disregarded Glover's edginess. Open your mind and heart to the Orishas. They will guide you in all things, ashe or no. Lifting herself to her feet, Elder Adeyemi led them to the small garden, where weeds encroached on a set of dying poppies. TJ suppressed an internal groan. Those weeds would be waiting for him soon once Dad's deep cleaning session kicked off. You may not know this, Mr. Young, Adeyemi chimed, but Babalawo Glover here has an affinity for Oko's magic. TJ tried his best to rack his brain for which Orisha that was. The deity had something to do with plants, he thought. The Babalawo will demonstrate a simple healing ritual to uproot the weeds and cure these flowers. Watch closely. I'll only do it once, Glover droned. The man knelt down on a knee and spoke words TJ was actually familiar with for once. It was another phrase Mom used often when she tended to the gardens. Watch, Elder Adeyemi whispered in his ear. Her breath, unlike Glover's, was as cool as an ocean breeze. See how he moves his hands? Listen to how he says his words. Feel the ashe he draws on. For a moment, TJ saw the fog he had become familiar with. It sprang between Glover's hands and the plants, as the weeds receded back into the earth, almost like they knew their time was up, and the dying flowers rose up to the afternoon sun, their petals sprouting anew, the purple as vibrant as the first day they bloomed. Yeah, I can see it, he murmured to Adeyemi. You mean you feel it? She corrected him. TJ didn't have the heart to correct her. After all, who knew more? A teenager who had never done magic before? Or an elder who had been steeped in it for her whole, very long life? Yeah, I meant feel it. Now, you do it, Priest Glover ordered, but his deadpan said he expected another failure. TJ walked to the tiny garden, then knelt once he reached one of the flowers Glover left dead. He recited the words perfectly, confidently. He did as Elder Adeyemi said. He moved his hands like Glover, but most of all, he felt as he thought Glover had. And for an instant, as Glover glared over his shoulder, he could sense ashe pouring off of the old man, the residual magic he had used before. It was almost like the way he felt after Mom left the water ritual unfinished. Only now, TJ was doing it all on his own. Slowly, very slowly, but surely, the wilted flower started to spread wide to the sun. It did not fan out as broadly as Glover's, the lavender colors of the lily lighter than they should be, but it was something. It was magic. TJ smiled, Adeyemi beamed, and Glover, for once, was free of his usual scowl. Chapter 9. The Decision. When TJ, Priest Glover, and Elder Adeyemi returned indoors, TJ had his guests wait in the family room. Then he walked into the foyer and called up to his parents that he was done with his tests. Almost before TJ finished his sentence, Mom appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide and hopeful, magnified by her large glasses. Pressing a finger to her lips, she gestured a thumbs up or thumbs down to TJ before pointing at him. TJ smiled awkwardly and returned her voiceless questions with a shrug, coupled with a so-so shake of his hand. Mom's shoulders fell, but her eyes still bulged, like she was in shock that he hadn't outright failed. "The hell y'all doing?" Dad whispered. TJ and Mom jumped at the same time, TJ gripping the stair railing and Mom flinging her hand to her chest in surprise. But in the next moment, Mom hit Dad around his shoulder playfully as TJ tried not to laugh. If he were honest, he wasn't exactly sure how his session went. For a majority of it, it seemed like he was doomed to fail. Yet in the end, it seemed like he finally made some progress. Is that all the priest and the headmistress needed to see? Perhaps all he had to demonstrate was any form of magic, no matter how small. After all, that's what schools were for, right? To make him and the other students better. "Is everything all right in there?" came Elder Adeyemi's voice echoing down the hall. "Yes, we're coming right now," Mom called back as she hustled down the stairs. Dad lumbered behind her. A few moments later, they were all back in the living room where the meeting had started. TJ sat between his parents on the couch once more. Their guests sat across from them in the old sofas, and Dayo's awards watched over them all. For a few silent moments, Priest Glover held a notebook in hand, the staccato beat of his pen scratching atop the paper interrupted only by the flipping of pages. TJ fiddled with his thumbs, and he swore he could feel his mother's rapid heartbeat through the pressure of her arm against his. If the priest was taking this long, that had to mean a good thing. He remembered Mom telling him that in court cases decided by a jury,
A long deliberation usually meant an innocent verdict. Perhaps in this situation it meant a positive outcome. After some more rustling of papers and etching of pens, Priest Glover said, "We conducted several tests for Mr. Young today. In our first test, he failed to show any alignment with any Orisha, something that's not relevant officially until the first year of senior secondary school at best," Mom reminded him. "And in the following examinations," Glover continued without missing a beat, "the prospect showed little to no signs of Oshe." "But what about that flower I cured?" TJ interrupted. He hadn't noticed that his butt was now on the edge of the couch or that his nails were digging into his hands. "That counts for something, doesn't it?" Mom joined in. But TJ couldn't help noticing a shift in her tone. She must have known that curing flowers wasn't impressive enough to be accepted into the Harvard University of Magic schools. But that still left room for another school for gifted children in the States, TJ hoped. "It counts," Glover conceded. TJ knew there was a but coming, though. "But I cannot in good confidence say Mr. Young would succeed at IFA Academy." That wasn't a no. TJ's breath quickened as he glanced at Elder Adeyemi, who sat still as a placid lake. Was she really about to accept him? Is that why the priest looked so disgruntled? Because he disagreed with her decision? "He is not ready," Glover continued. "However," TJ's heartbeat hammered in his throat. He couldn't believe it. He was going to finally go off and learn all the things his sister did. With enough time, maybe even his cousins would let him play their games with him. And then he'd finally have a leg up on Tunde, for once. "He's going to IFA Academy?" Mom couldn't contain herself. She clapped her hands together and pressed them into her nose like a prayer. Priest Glover's eyes looked like they'd pop out of their sockets, and TJ never thought he'd seen a man's eyebrows raised so high. "Heavens, no!" TJ and Mom sat back at the same time, wearing twin frowns. Were it not for the couch's support, they might have sunk straight to the floor. TJ felt terrible, like something rancid could come up his throat. What do you mean?" Mom asked. "If the man says he ain't ready, Dad said, then leaned in close to TJ. "You did your best, son. Can't ask for more than that." He looked almost relieved. Mom gave him a look that clearly read he needed to shut all the way up. TJ dropped his head and pretended he was very interested in the chipped wood paneling under his feet. He couldn't bear to see Mom's face. He'd seen her disappointed too many times before. And he had really thought for a moment he'd been able to go, even if they put him into some extra classes or something like that. "Mr. Young will not be accepted to IFA Academy," Elder Adeyemi reiterated. Her cool voice had a finality to it like ice. "But if he accepts," TJ peeked up slowly, "we will admit him to Camp Olosa." TJ's head flew up in surprise. Sure, camp was no IFA, but at least TJ could get some sort of training with his Ashe. "You people got camps for this now?" Dad asked, half impressed. TJ tried to ignore that he said, "You people." "Not many," Priest Glover said. "Only the one Camp Olosa in the States for those who practice under the Orishas. And of course for the others, like the natives down south in Mexico, the shaman enclaves in some of the American reservations. Even the Norse got a camp in British Columbia." "It's a developmental camp," Elder Adeyemi explained. "Many of the campers there are like Mr. Young, late bloomers, or those who need additional training between schooling years." Mom didn't move from her slumped position. "So, he can still get into IFA Academy? Or into any of the others?" Adeyemi lifted an elegant finger as Mom shot up again. "I don't want to get your hopes up. Most campers there attend just to hone the little they have. Not many go on to the proper schools, but that doesn't necessarily matter. Quite a few go on to have wonderful careers just by attending the camp. Enchanting farmers,
magical service workers, sanitation, and the like. It sounded like Adeyemi was trying to sell them a used car. To TJ, it sounded like the second chance he was looking for. Now that he thought on it, he would have sworn Dio went to the camp a few times. It lacks a certain prestige, Priest Glover said. It's a remedial institution, to put it more bluntly than the headmistress has. Remedial? Mom stirred in her seat once more. Ifedayo went there 3 summers straight. You said it was just a regular summer camp, Dad said incredulously. It was expensive, Mom murmured to him. I'll explain later. Priest Glover cleared his throat. That's right. Miss Young went when she was supposed to. For Mr. Young here, while he should already be entering his 3rd year at the Divina schools, his position in the camp will be on a probationary status. But judging by your expression, you don't seem to find this acceptable. Believe you me, I think the boy shouldn't be accepted at all, even to the camp. It'd be no issue. We could... No, he'll go. Mom sat up straight. When does it start again? A week from today, actually, Elder Adeyemi answered. Marvelous timing. Super dope timing. More like it, TJ thought as the fluttering in his stomach ramped up. Camp Olosa was sounding like summer school, but for a subject he actually cared about. He'd always asked his parents if he could go to a sleepaway camp, but they never could afford it. Plus, it was the first time someone accepted him to anything magical. Even his own cousins didn't allow their clouded relative to play their mystical games with him. Maybe he wouldn't get to Ifa Academy, but he could at least learn a few more things while having some fun for a couple of months. Is it far? TJ asked, excited at the idea he might get to travel. Elder Adeyemi blinked and smiled at TJ's rising enthusiasm. It's in New Orleans. Chapter 10. Not Any Other Bird. On the morning that TJ was to board the plane to Camp Olosa, he felt like the only one who cared about being on time. TJ had come to realize that colored people time, the stereotype of Black Americans and Nigerians being late to everything, was astronomically true for his parents. Mom and Dad met each other in their sophomore year at UCLA. They both shared a general education class for biology, where more times than not, they showed up late. They both said it was because of a lack of interest in the subject, but TJ knew different, especially that day. Unlike his parents, he had read all about the TSA and how long it took on average for someone to get through the airport checkpoints. The recommended time was 2 hours before any domestic flight, which meant TJ and his family should have been out of the house 30 minutes prior. TJ didn't understand why it took so long for them to get everything and everyone together and out of the house. It wasn't like they were all going on vacation together. TJ was the only one who needed to pack, which he got done an hour after Elder Adeyemi and Glover had left their house. Mom rushed up and down the stairs to make sure they forgot nothing. A wet toothbrush lodged between her high-top dreadlocks. Meanwhile, Dad fixed up another large breakfast. TJ wasn't allowed to leave the table until he finished the bright red beet smoothie in front of him. And Tunde did his best to keep out of the way of the bustling morning maelstrom. While Mom made her 4th lap up the stairs, TJ's eyes flipped between his disgusting smoothie and his phone on the table. As promised, he cleaned the chandelier for Tunde, and in return, his brother showed him how to access Evo, short for evocation, a special browser for news and information about the magical community you wouldn't find on the major networks like Divination Today or the Eshu Messenger Press. TJ almost felt like he was on the dark web. For the past week, he had done as much research as he could, further rushed once he found out one of the primary rules at Camp Olosa was that campers could not bring any personal cell phones. For his first day of research, TJ tried to find anything relating to a promised child, But even with Evo, nothing popped up. Then he looked up topics about the keepers, and the results returned in the thousands. Unfortunately, most of it he already knew. They were a radical group who intended to bring back the Orishas to live among mortals. What he did learn, however, was that their methods were complicated and never ended well for anyone. They often revealed themselves to the non-magical community, either by putting them at risk or worse. As a whole, atrocities aside, revealing yourself as magical had been a huge no-no for many, many years, making the keepers enemy number one among magical Nigerian authorities and even international ones. However, when he tried to learn more, it turned out most of the articles TJ found were more speculation than fact where the keepers were concerned. They were something like a secret society, even within the secret society of diviner kind. No one even knew if their leader, named Olubala, was a man or woman, young or old, one person or a collective. And every time this Olubala made demands against diviner kind, he, she, or they wore a mask, just like the other keepers did. "What's got you looking sick, honey?" his mother asked just as he scrolled past a particularly nasty photo of a diviner whose face looked like it had been stuck in a beehive. Apparently they had tried to fight against Olubala. "Honey, what's that you have in your hand?" Without looking, TJ fumbled his phone to scroll to a safety tab on his browser that he had prepped in anticipation for situations just like that one. He nearly dropped his phone before he flipped the screen to Mom. If his no-look switch-up was right, his phone should have depicted a page detailing standard shield charms and the theory of their applications against opponents with more powerful ashe. Mom's inquisitive eyes turned sharp, however, and TJ's heart dropped into his butt. "Where did you find that website?" she asked with a frown, snatching the phone from his hand to examine it more closely. TJ flitted a quick look to Tunde, who crunched down loudly on his cereal like he couldn't hear a thing. TJ stuttered, sweat building on his palms. "I can explain. Though the Shilona charm may be considered controversial," Mom began to read, "it has come in handy for many diviners finding difficulty generating their own ashe. The technique is simple, and I liken it to the Japanese martial art, jiu-jitsu, where the practitioner uses their opponent's strength against them." As Mom continued farther into the article, TJ felt the heartbeat thundering in his ears finally subside. She hadn't seen the grotesque picture after all. Still, the ridicule across her brow was unmistakable. "Who wrote this?" Mom asked as she scrolled her thumb through the phone. "Ah, just as I thought. Oluolowukandi. I went to Ifa with him, you know? He always looked for shortcuts and fake initiations." She turned the phone to TJ. "Why didn't you ask me to help you? This sort of rubbish is what will get you hurt." TJ bit at his lip, then rubbed the back of his head like his father always did. TJ had read that part of Camp Olosa's extracurricular activities included dueling, and he didn't want to look like a complete novice. Mom's steadied gaze was disconcerting, her glasses framing her slitted eyes like an intimidating mask. She waited for his response, holding out his phone with a lazy grip. "Well, why didn't you ask?" TJ cleared his throat, surprised at its tightness. "I don't know. I didn't want to bother you." "Bother me? The day before you go off to Olosa?" TJ picked at his spoon, and his voice came out low. "It's like Priest Glover said, I won't have you around, so I gotta figure it out some way." Mom set TJ's phone in front of him. "That's fine. I understand." She pointed a sharp finger at the screen. "But don't listen to this man, you hear me? He'll have you burning off your eyebrows instead of whatever it is he's scheming up these days." "Yes, ma'am." TJ took his phone back and slipped it under the table again. The conversation with his mom had culminated in his palms becoming very sweaty. His hands were so damp he couldn't keep a grip around his phone. Slipping out of his hand, his phone banged against the ground, drawing the attention of Dad, who had just walked by the kitchen door. "Boy, stop playing around with your phone and finish your drink," he said through a mouthful of grapefruit.
A dozen tiny gulps and a few dry heaves later, TJ finished the maroon concoction, and Dad finally dismissed him from the table. Despite all his research, he still didn't feel confident he'd succeed at Campolosa. A lot of the campers were teenagers with a few years' head start on him. Though the tingle at his fingers came more frequently, he still couldn't muster his own forms of magic consistently, and his ashe was strongest with Mom around or in the presence of his sister's staff. Dio's staff, TJ thought, just as he walked past the altar in the family room. Obviously, he couldn't have Mom with him during the summer. Priest Glover was right about that. But in a way, he could take his sister with him if he took her staff. That way, he could have a fallback if the camp was too tough. The only issue was that he wasn't allowed a staff until he was 15 and a half, or in his first year of senior secondary school. Plus, Mom would have had an outright fit. "How you feeling?" Dad's voice came from behind, making TJ jump. "Nervous?" "Me? Nervous?" TJ snorted through his nose. "What do I have to be nervous about?" TJ did his best to keep the shakiness in his voice steady. Dad preferred it when he was confident, especially before the big game. He might not have cared about Campolosa or IFA Academy, but he understood the concept of rising to the occasion. "It's a big step," Dad said. "I remember how twitchy Dio got when she was going off to that academy. She had the same look you got now." TJ flattened his expression. "I'm fine, Dad. Worst case scenario, I'll blow my hand off or something. Shoot, I might not even be able to do that." Dad frowned. "I've been watching you this week. You're doing better with this stuff. Just the other day, you did that thing with the plants. What do you call it? Curing?" TJ nodded, but pouted. In his early research, he discovered that that was one of the most simple forms of magic, not very impressive next to fireballs and fortune-telling. Dad drew a line around his goatee with thumb and forefinger, then gestured to the trinkets and staffs near the altar. "Does it help you practice when you're at this table?" TJ nodded again, solemnly. He couldn't deny that it brought him strength. They got baseball at this camp of yours?" Dad asked with a grunt. TJ turned a questioning look on Dad, who smiled and grabbed Dio's staff from its pedestal. He hefted it into his large hands. "Yeah, this looks like the right length. Maybe a little lighter than a metal bat, but..." "What are you talking about?" TJ asked as Dad disappeared into a side closet. A moment later, he pulled out a baseball bag, took the staff, and stuffed it into the compartment specifically designed for a baseball bat. "It's a perfect fit." He handed the bag off to TJ. TJ held it close to his chest. It was a perfect fit, but it had one gaping flaw. "I'm not allowed to have a staff with me at camp, and Mom will be mad if Dio's staff is gone." Dad shrugged. "If they see it in your bag, just tell them your clouded father put it in there. We'll just say I'm ignorant." He winked. "Plus, I heard that Mr. Balawe was talking to your mother on that water phone. He said staff magic is strong, and you should use every advantage you can get. And if your mom asks, well, I'm sure I'll come up with something." TJ grabbed Dad around the middle without thinking. "Thanks, Dad." A few minutes later, Mom dashed down the stairs screaming for everyone to get in the car. TJ pulled out his phone. They only had an hour until his flight left. Lucky for them, Dad was the kind of driver who split lanes and ran through yellow lights. In 15 minutes flat, they screeched into the Delta Airlines departure terminal. Dad and Tunde said their goodbyes. Tunde jeered, reminding TJ the family would still love him even if he failed a remedial summer camp. TJ couldn't help smiling at that. He knew that was the closest thing to encouragement he'd get from his brother. "Let's go, Tomori," Mom said, rolling a bag behind her. "Your flight boards in 30 minutes. TJ bit back his retort. If he told Mom he had been ready for hours and it was her fault they were late, he was sure to get popped in the mouth. So he waved to Tunde and Dad and shuffled behind Mom into the airport. He and Mom speed walked to check their bags, their feet moving so fast that the click-clack of Mom's flats and the squeak-squeak of TJ's Jordans turned heads. Thankfully, the man at the desk didn't question the oddly shaped bat in TJ's baseball bag. Then they were through their gate, through TSA, and straight to the announcement of Flight 00110 now boarding. "Got here just in time," Mom sighed through labored breaths. TJ would never understand why she always insisted on stressing herself out. He would have preferred being early and bored than sweating buckets and nearly late. The flight wasn't bad, only 4 hours to New Orleans. Much better than TJ's first flight, which had been to Lagos, Nigeria. That had been a full day of travel, including 2 layovers. On this flight, TJ had only been subjected to 2 foul odors during the entire trip, and there were no crying babies in sight. He hoped that was a good omen for what was to come. The view outside his window seat was spotless, except for a few gray clouds covering the distant desert below, which he assumed was Arizona or New Mexico. For a few moments, he wondered if there were other young diviners down there like him, getting ready to go to camp or discovering their own ashe. Then he thought about the other campers he'd meet. If Camp Alosa really was for remedial diviners, maybe they'd be just as nervous as he was now. That would make things a whole lot easier. TJ pulled out his camp brochure to read up more on what to expect. He'd gone over it 200 or 300 times, and the only thing of value he could really pull from it was that Alosa, the Orisha of lagoons, traditionally took sheep as offerings, which she fed to her alligator messengers. After reading the brochure another 100 times, he gazed back out of the window. When the landscape turned from the reds and browns of the deserts into the marsh and clouded skies of swamps, TJ felt a hand brush against the back of his own. "How are you feeling, honey bunny?" Mom asked with a serious yet gentle tone. TJ could barely hear her, though, his ears always clogged up on airplanes. "I'm a little gassy," TJ joked, though it had been true. The airplane cheese wasn't sitting well with his stomach, and he wasn't trying to be the third stinker on the trip. Mom slapped him playfully across the arm. "You know what I mean, silly." TJ shrugged. Now that they were so close to their destination, he was surprisingly even-tempered. But he knew that only meant he was liable to burst at any moment. "Did you tell any of your friends where you are going?" she asked. TJ rolled his eyes. "Oh, yes, all 0 of them." TJ knew Mom was making sure he didn't tell anyone about the magic camp he was attending, but he couldn't help being blunt despite her giving him bug eyes. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm only joking. Siri knows I'll only be away for the summer." TJ did his best not to burst out laughing as he tapped at his iPhone screen. "She was sad at first, but I think she'll come around." "Don't play like that. You have friends." Mom's shoulders turned squarely on TJ. "What about that one boy? Gabriel." "You mean my study partner in 5th grade?" "You weren't friends?" If a guy who spoke to me just to ace our project on California missions counts as a friend, then yeah, I guess. Mom's brow furrowed. "What about that Christian Flores boy? I take him home all the time." "That's because he likes you, Mom, not me. And don't look at me like that. It's a personal choice. I read somewhere that introverts like me thrive better by ourselves." That was a half-truth. Sure, TJ didn't feel the need to make friends to be happy, but he also didn't have the best luck with graduating from being a mere acquaintance with most of his classmates. He just never fit in nicely with anyone, was all. They all grew up to do teenager stuff, and he was still stuck on cartoons, the not-so-cool kind. But like Dio always said, sometimes it took time to find your tribe. It was just taking him a little longer to find his. But he could wait. "No-oh." Mom sucked her teeth, her old Nigerian accent slipping through. "This summer you're going to make some friends." I thought I was supposed to focus on my studies. "You can do both, Tomori," she said a bit too loudly. The snoring man next to her stirred, so she lowered her voice. "You know I'm proud of you no matter what you do. I just want what's best for you." TJ didn't know what came over him, but something about what Mom said didn't sit well with him. Her words felt generic, hollow. So he had to ask, "Then why didn't you or anyone else ever notice me?" Mom closed her mouth and looked down in thought. TJ hadn't meant to make her uncomfortable. It just came out. And for whatever reason, he wasn't done. Everyone at the funeral loved Dio. They really loved her. It was like they lost a sister, like they were closer to her than I was. And you won't even tell me why. Mom stayed quiet for a long while. TJ thought she was going to ignore him for the whole rest of the flight until they landed. But even when she opened her mouth on occasion, she fiddled with the menu in the seat in front of her or the headphones she had plugged in. I can't shield you from the truth once you step foot onto the campgrounds, she finally said, sighing. Looking around briefly before lowering her voice, she continued. Most of the elders there are bound to know about Ifedayo. You see, all that promised child stuff happened 3 years ago. The same time we started growing apart, TJ thought. It wasn't until she graduated from Ifa Academy that the oracle's readings started making sense. They say that Ifedayo would... She trailed off, her eyes glistening. TJ rubbed the inside of her palm to encourage her to go on. I don't know the whole thing, she said. No one does. But the oracle said that she would have special powers. Powers beyond a typical diviner. A power that would rival the Orishas themselves. It was said she would awaken an Orisha long lost. It all seemed to add up. You don't know this, but many of the priests believe the Orishas have gone, though their power remains. For centuries, no one has communed with them directly. Well, there was a brief time back in the 60s when people thought they would come back. The war then was so similar to some of the old stories. What war? TJ asked, sitting up straight. The Biafra War. The civil war that nearly tore Nigeria apart. Mom's words came slowly. We don't talk about it. I wasn't even alive when it happened. But my mother immigrated to the States after my father died because of it. TJ scrunched his eyebrows curiously. So, Dio was supposed to do what exactly? Outside of uncovering a lost Orisha? That I don't know. Many suspected she was destined to open the gate back to the Orishas, if the connection was really lost at all. Then she died, TJ thought. So the oracles were wrong then, TJ said almost to himself. It happens from time to time. And I'm following all of that. A heat rose through TJ's spine. That's why Mom didn't want him to know. It was a lot of pressure to live up to, and that pressure was making him sweat again. He took off his zip-up hoodie and loosened the button at the top of his shirt, drawing a worrying look from Mom. How could anyone expect him to amount to much? No wonder everyone was so devastated. Dio was marked to do phenomenal things, and him, not so much. I know you would never say this, he turned to Mom after stuffing his jacket under his seat. But I know Dio was the favorite. You and Dad loved Tunde too. And I'm number 3 on the list. Don't say that. Mom jabbed a finger at him, accidentally elbowing the sleeping man next to her. Don't you ever. You know we love you all the same. Sure, you love us the same. But don't give me that stuff about no favorites. Everyone has them. I'll admit it. Dio was my favorite too. Mom hung her head low again, searching for words within her hands, which were now twiddling with the stitching on her airplane blanket. My bond with Ifedayo was different, that's true. But that shouldn't matter. Sometimes people put too much faith in promised children or those who are more apparently talented. And then there's teenagers like me, the ones who do best cheering from the bench. Which works fine for me, honestly. He tried for a smile, though it probably came off as an awkward grimace. Besides, like Priest Glover says, I could just be a fluke. Mom sighed before saying, Adi oreoki, koleshe didi, orio yekeye. TJ's eyes glazed over.
Mom laughed a little. Don't worry. This summer you'll learn the language well enough. What I said means, the crest on the head of the peacock simply won't fit any other bird. If that was supposed to be clearer, it didn't help TJ's comprehension one bit. He never liked the proverbs his mother told him. Why couldn't she just say what she meant to say? It would be a whole hell of a lot easier in the communication department. Mom leaned in close to TJ, whispering so that he knew her words were only for him. We are all differently endowed, Tomori. Be secure in who you are. Envy no one.
Agolona. Agolona. Ago eshuo, agolona. Ago